Hello, everybody. This is Joshua.
You picking that up?
Yeah, I'm picking it up. I'm trying to do an intro here.
Okay.
Can I start it over again? You know what?
Please don't.
What you just did felt like 2020.
Who knew? Who knew 2020 could be so perfectly summarized?
Okay, let me try to tune 2020 out and redo this.
Yeah. Can you auto-tune 2020 out?
Oh shit. Let's try to auto-tune this. Hello everybody. This is Joshua Hatton with One Nation Under Whisky podcast. I'm joined today, and I'm joined, as always, by my good friend, my business partner, now for 4 going on 5 years of this podcast, the good Mr. Jason Johnston Yellen.
Hello.
Hello.
Happy Festivus.
All right, you're feeling that cranky. Are you about to air some grievances? Was that like a little nod to here it comes?
I thought Happy Festivus was a nice thing to say.
But isn't Festivus all about airing grievances and doing feats of strength, which sounds like wrestling and beating people up? And
Well, let me just say we celebrate Festivus in very different ways. Very different ways. As you drink what looks like your own urine from a mason jar.
it's pink. Why would my own urine be pink?
Your urine isn't pink when you wake up in the morning. Wow, I mean, gosh, we celebrate Festivus differently. Our morning urine is different. Wow. I'm starting to think we're two different people who live in two different worlds.
I'm starting to think your kidneys are bleeding on the inside.
Let he whose kidneys have not bled cast the first stone.
Cast the first kidney stone.
There you go. Well done. Well done. You salvaged that. So here we are recording on what I consider our vacation.
It basically is. I mean, I will have some work to be. There will be work to be had between the Christmas and New Year's for me. There always is. I never turn work off, but this is as downtime gets for me. I mean, I worked on Christmas Day just a little bit, but I worked on Christmas Day.
But I feel like you do that just so you can say I worked on Christmas Day. I don't think you had to work on Christmas Day.
That's correct. I didn't have to work, but I did.
The backpedaling here is very impressive. Very impressive.
Well, I was... Yeah, go ahead.
Can I ask you a question?
You may.
Do you think we're releasing too much whiskey as an industry?
Didn't we answer that question in the final episode of Extra Extra, the final first season episode?
I feel like we started to frame it, but I didn't feel like we gave a thorough answer on it, which is classic, right? We had a double episode. We spent the first 15 minutes kind of recounting the FET, you know me. Mm-hmm. And then we said, this looks like it's going to go through. This looks like good news here. Uh-huh. It's tied to this very large COVID stimulus bill. Uh-huh. And then the president didn't sign it. And here we are recording on the 28th. Uh-huh. He signed it on the 27th after people lost their unemployment benefits. And so, that's a week since we recorded that episode. And it was 2 weeks since we recorded the episode before it. Gosh, that little story's still going on. Anyway, that's not what I want to return our attention to. Mm-hmm. We then spent 3/4 of the double episode identifying the article and reading the point counterpoint. And then we got to the end and we kind of tried to rush the answer to it. And so I just wanted to take a moment at the start of One Nation Under Whisky to just stretch, because I think it is a good question about 2020, which I think applies to 2019, to 2018, but here we are in 2020. As we reflect on this year, put a few more leaves on the branches of the question, is the industry releasing too much whiskey?
Well, I feel as if I answered the question somewhat thoroughly on that episode. My answer was that no, we're not releasing too much whiskey, that we should probably be releasing more whiskey to meet the demand. I think that there's enough demand that more whiskey can be released. There's a reason why age statements are going away.
So maybe I didn't get to answer the question.
That's correct. And you felt
Cheated?
cheated. Yeah, thank you. I couldn't think of the word. You felt cheated. You couldn't give your answer to the question. So what's your answer, Jason?
I think the answer is yes.
And why? Show us your work.
But here's the thing. Yours is no with a but. And then you go on to say, maybe release some different things. And mine is a yes with a but, which is maybe release some different things. And so and so for me, there's a lot of whiskey out there. There's no doubt about that. And we're seeing, more distilleries come online, more offerings, obviously more independent bottlers being born. And this is something you and I have discussed on various episodes of our podcast network, I like to call it, where as independent bottlers who are offered a series of parcels, we're seeing the same whiskies coming out from independent bottlers.
Sure.
Ourselves included. I'm not pointing fingers here. I'm including us in this.
Oh, yeah.
And when you see a rake of unnamed Orkney whiskey at a certain age and at a certain ABV, we can say, "Oh, I know which parcel that's from. I know who was selling that, and I know how much it cost." And so, for independent bottlers who are, bringing whiskey in one door, bottling it, and then sending it out the other door off to retailers, I don't think we're doing the industry a service when we keep repackaging the same parcels. And so that's an area where I would say there's just too much whiskey there, right? That doesn't all need to be going out the door at the same time.
You are 100% correct there. I don't necessarily think, however, that it means there's too much whiskey. I think the manner in which it's being released makes it appear as if there's too much.
Well, there's clearly too much of that whiskey.
Yes,
right?
yes.
That whiskey that you can identify. I'm also in a funny position in 2020 where I think we've suddenly walked into a world where there's too much Lagavulin being released. And if you'd asked me, maybe not last year, but maybe if you'd asked me in 2018, certainly in 2016, definitely in 2014, if you'd asked me, is there too much Lagavulin in the world? I would have said, absolutely not. We need much, much more Lagavulin. The problem is you're either seeing the very old Lagavulin at very high pricing, or you're seeing the 8-year-old and the 9-year-old and the 10-year-old and the 11-year-old that are coming out under different liveries, under different packaging, right? The 8-year-old, which, as you know, because you helped get it to me, I picked up 13 bottles of the Lagavulin 8 this year. When it was in Massachusetts for, I think, $40 a bottle, which at 48% for that 8-year-old is a cracking
fantastic price. Great juice. Yeah.
Right, really cracking. So you've got the 8-year-old part of the standard release. You've got the 9-year-old, which is the Game of Thrones, and you mentioned the Game of Thrones series in the extra episode, where
and that was
we're
my
now
butt. Yeah, that was my butt.
Right. And we're seeing that 9-year-old in some places for $25 a bottle, and that's 46% alcohol. That's a good price on that. Then you're seeing the 10-year-old that's travel retail, which, if you can remember such a thing as travel retail, which I think is maybe 43%.
You are correct. Yeah, 43%, and drinks like a champ of 43, in my opinion.
Right. And we tasted that at the distillery at the Fashil last year in 2019. Because we definitely went there in 2020. And so there's your 10-year-old that goes into travel retail. Mm-hmm. And then you've got the 11-year-old, which is the offerman. Mm-hmm. And that offerman kind of moves around in price. And then let's keep going with this. You've got the 12-year-old, which is the annual release from Lagavulin.
Yeah, and this is... speaking of really quickly, I just want to put a pin in what you're talking about. If we are to celebrate Festivus correctly, I'm going to air a grievance here.
Tune in later for the wrestling scene.
Because the 11-year-old, the Nick Offerman one, what was that bottled at? Was that 46 or 48? Maybe 43, yes. So somewhere around there, right?
Yes to the question.
Low to mid 40s, somewhere around there.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen pricing as low as $38 a bottle and as high as maybe $65-ish, $70-ish a bottle, okay?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
For an 11-year-old that I think is all ex-bourbon, here's where the grievance begins.
Okay.
Kick up the year by 1 to a 12-year-old and put it out at cask strength, and we go from an 11-year-old at, I'm guessing proper pricing, somewhere around $65-ish, to a 12-year-old at full strength at $160. That is just too much of a jump, I think, for anybody.
Well, and what's interesting about the pricing on it is you were saying, I've seen it what was the as low as that you've seen it? 30, did you say?
$38.
Okay, because I've never seen it lower than 65, and I did a quick Google search here, and I found it for $125, and I found it for $90, and I found it for $100. Apparently, there's a very big window for the Offerman release. The thing I was trying to do, and it surprises me when somebody has an online store and they don't tell you the ABV of the bottle that you're trying to buy from them. And so I'm actually zooming in on a picture of it, and the ABV is round the corner on the label.
I would let you know what the ABV was if I had a bottle, but I don't have a bottle.
And me neither. And it's one that I would love to have a bottle of, but if you see one for 38, please pick it up for me.
I will. I will do. I don't know why I passed on it to what I saw for 38. Like, you just buy bottles at that price, and no.
So here it is here, 46% ABV. And it also looks like as it's starting to sell out, that's causing a little bit of this roller coaster in pricing.
Could be, yeah.
But to the larger point here, we now have 8-year-old, 9-year-old, 10-year-old, 11-year-old, and 12-year-old Lagavulin, all available from Diageo. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of Lagavulin. And again, back to this question about 2020, are we releasing too much whiskey as an industry? If you can do 5 separate age statements from 8 to 12, that might be too much whiskey. That might be asking too much of the consumer to keep chasing. And that's only one distillery.
Yeah.
Think about how that plays out through Scotland, into world whiskies, into American craft, into American bourbon, and then into non-whiskey spirits, which is a separate question.
But think about potentially why they're releasing these whiskeys.
Mm-hmm. Go on.
For the Game of Thrones, it's obvious this is potentially a new market for them. They want the geek market. They want those consumers. For the Offerman one, they're interested in the people who liked Parks and Recs and comedy, and right, it's just another pocket of people. Offer them something different. Give them a gateway whiskey. And we do the same thing, right? We've done bottlings with Hello from the Magic Tavern, right? That was a collaboration. Mm-hmm. We collaborate with Whistle Pig, with Balcones. We have a collaboration that I would love to release in 2021, but COVID may see it as a 2022 collaboration. It will likely be the biggest collaboration you and I have done to date, and potentially the biggest one we could ever do. Who knows? My point is that what they're doing with these whiskeys is just looking for other consumers, new consumers. And how do you bring it in? How do you bring them in? You bring them in through other things that they're passionate about.
But I think that's a lovely, nuanced response. But I think it's so striking that we can ask the question, are we releasing too much whiskey as an industry? And you and I never play devil's advocate with any of these questions. We never, in pre-production, say, okay, you take the yes side, I'll take the no side, and we'll run it, right? Yeah. We only ever discuss this as we would discuss it, two guys having a dram together. Mm-hmm. And it's so interesting to me that we can ask that question, have a yes but and a no but, and essentially say the same thing to one another. Because for me, where's the official Glenelgan? You know, where's bring me more Dal Ewan, bring me more Tormore, bring me more Aberfeldy, which Bacardi are working on, right? Let's go and explore Scotland's distilleries, and let's bring out more from the ones we don't know anything about. And I think when I hear that question, and this is why I think your answer was so smart. When I hear that question, I only think to answer it as a whiskey geek. And as a whiskey geek, I'm saying, yes, we're releasing too much whiskey, but I would love to see some from the lesser known distilleries. Mm-hmm. And I think with that nuance that you brought to it, you were answering it as an industry member and saying, but you got to think about building your brand, expanding your brand, finding new audiences, right? And you go and find the geeks, and you go and find those who love comedy, and you go and find these other ones over here. And I think that's a fine way to answer the question. I'm just left as a whiskey geek saying, who's looking after me? Right, and I know I am being looked after. Christ, I'm not hurting for whiskey, as this year's Zooms have revealed. Right, neither one of us are hurting for whiskey, and there's always something new we could be buying on any given day.
Shelves are so bare. Can you hear the echo? It's just the echo from these bare shelves as I talk.
And so, yes, I am being taken care of. However. And I just had this conversation over the weekend. When you and I bring out our Glenelgan, right? We just had the second release for the UK, Europe, and rest of the world. Our beloved Jess got to turn cartwheels in the Glasgow streets because it actually made it to store shelves in the UK. Yep. And the Imperial sold out, and the Clynlish sold out, and the bourbon is moving. Lovely, lovely. The Glenelgan, right? I don't want to say sitting there, but we put out a lot of Glenelgan because you and I like the Glenelgan distillery. Yeah. Yep. And as far as we know, as far as we understand, there might be one official bottling of Glenelgan in the UK. But if you keep your eyes and ears open, you'll see it coming out from independent bottlers. And so here's us saying, here, pick up a Glenelgan. Pick up a Glenelgan. And the consumer says, I'll be taking your Imperial, thanks. I'll be taking your Clynlish, thanks. And we're like, but don't forget the Glenelgan. It's a really good cask of Glenelgan. And the consumer, it's too easy for the consumer to say, I don't really know Glenelgan. And so it would be nice if, independent bottlers have done heavy lifting for decades on different distilleries. It'd be nice if our job was just made that little bit easier by having another Glenelgan on the market, an official Glenelgan roaming around where consumers can build on that knowledge. So there we go. I'm happy to leave it there. I don't think you're going to do better than that lovely nuanced answer you gave us. So
it's so funny. Just I know you want to leave it there, but as you were making that point about the Glenelgan, right? Check out this Glenelgan. Oh, that's nice. You guys just released this 24-year-old Imperial. I'll be having that. Thank you very much. And all these other more noticeable names or recognizable names, bigger names, whatever it might be. Meanwhile, we're saying, yeah, but this one's really good. And this, I don't know that we'll keep this in the podcast, but it just makes me think back to the primaries earlier this year. There were so many people running for the Democratic ticket, and Elizabeth Warren would come out, and so many people would say, "Yeah, but she's not electable." And supporters of her would simply say, "Well, she is electable if you vote for her." Right? Like
Right.
It's just the same with the Glen Elgin. No, it actually is really good. You just have to give it a go, right? It's just
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, nobody buys Glen Elgin. Well, how much Glen Elgin is for sale? well, nobody buys it. Yeah, but if you made it for sale, people might be able to buy it.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, but nobody buys it. But they don't buy it because it's not for sale. Yeah.
And then
we
you say,
shall see.
and then you say, "Oh, here's one for sale," and they say, "All right. Oh, look at that Imperial." Okay. Anyway. Do you feel better now that you were able to make your point, to make your argument?
I do. I definitely do. But I'm also glad that you were able to have a chance to build upon your point as well. Because I felt like after 62 minutes and 52 seconds, it felt like we got out with rushed answers. And I now feel like you and I have had a chance to stretch our legs
Good.
within the answer to that question. I also wanted to make it clear that your no but and my yes but were not just coming from contrarian positions, but instead were genuinely held thoughts and positions about that question.
No, I'm glad that you brought that up, but I do want to get back to the format of our regularly scheduled
Let's do it.
episode. And so, if you're a new listener, welcome to our year-end recap episode. And if you've listened to the previous 3 year-end reviews, welcome back. We're glad to have you. So in this episode, you and I, Jason, we have a few signposts along the way. And these signposts are you and I recognizing our favorite whiskey of the year, right?
Yes, sir.
You and I recognizing, and that's non-single cask nation whiskey of the year. You and I recognizing our favorite single cask nation whiskey of the year. So the bottling that you most loved and the bottling that I most loved. And then we always throw in a wild card, which could be a whiskey. It may not be a whiskey. And then orbiting those 3 selections, there might be some honorable mentions in those, differing categories. And then you and I look back at what were our favorite episodes of the year. So we'll discuss those. And then and this is new for 2020, I have a little bit of a wrinkle, a little bit of a question I want to throw in there.
Get some moisturizing cream in it.
And I don't think I've asked this before, at least not in this context. So I'm looking forward to asking that question a bit later. But
All right.
You and
I'm curious to see if you remember to ask it.
I know. I'm afraid I may forget. I'm afraid that I have forgotten the question altogether, because I can't think of what it is right now.
Well, and somewhat traditionally, in these year in review episodes, we've cast an eye back over the year and discussed what has surprised us, and I think the world coming to the brink of being snuffed out was quite surprising this year.
Well, there's that. But before we get too morbid,
There's that. That is a thing. That is the thing that happened in 2020.
Right? Yeah.
And will continue to happen in 2021. But let's keep it upbeat.
well, yeah, I was just going to say, if we're going to have discussions like this, we may as well pour a whiskey. I haven't poured a whiskey. And
Oh, yeah. I did a big pour.
see.
Big pour.
Yeah, so which whiskey did you pour? Did you pour your favorite SCN, your favorite non-SCN, or your wild card?
I started with SCN.
Okay, I'm going to pour my favorite.
And to paint a picture for the listener, I have poured it into my Joshua Half-Heart Glencairn from Travis Williams, which came in this year. That was an incredibly kind gift from Travis. The other Glencairn says, what it is, what we do, that we do, which really harkens back to our early days of padcasting before it was even a padcast. And anytime I see this Joshua glass, this Joshua Glencairn, I end up filling it with a hat and pour. It's subliminal. I can't help myself. My eyes are reading Joshua and my hands are thinking hat and pour.
I'm pouring my whiskey, as you know, into my Jason glass. And my fear is I may pour a Johnston pour, which is not, I mean, it's very scant. It's not a lot. I'm going to have to go a little heavy.
How dare you, sir? How dare you?
Hey, I'm not the one who doesn't know how to pour a glass of whiskey.
I tell you what, though, having my hat and pour in here and swirling this around the Glencairn, the oils on this are absolutely killer. And I'm going quite high on the Glencairn here. I'm used to our little spade ram glass. I love drinking from our single cask nation spade rams. And we have the nation are calling out for merchandise. We have not forgotten. We are definitely hearing you. Our very own Jess Lomas reminds us in our weekly meetings that we need more merchandise. Let's say it's coming in 2021 and then see if we fulfill that promise. But going high on the sides here, I'm really getting great oil coverage. So
what is your criteria for the best whiskey? Why did you... Let's discuss the criteria, and then let's reveal the whiskey. How's that? So, what was your criteria?
Yeah, I think when I tell you my criteria, I think you're going to guess the whiskey.
Oh shit!
and you know, I'm happy for that to happen. Okay. I'm okay with that.
Okay.
So, one of the great difficulties in us selecting our favorite SCN from the year is, and we've said this many, many times in many different places, it really is like choosing your favorite child.
Yeah.
Where we have tasted every cask that becomes a single cask nation release. We have selected every cask that becomes a single cask nation release. Every drop that goes into bottle, that goes out to the nation, whether they be in the United States or they be overseas, has been tested, tasted, challenged, adjudicated.
Ooh.
Right?
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, you're not wrong.
By us. By us. And so to say this is the one of the year is a little disingenuous. It's hard to say this one cask stands head and shoulders above all other casks. It's just not true. It's just not how we run the business, how we make our selections. So for me, I'm not just making my selection based on flavor, because I think they all taste really great for a host of different reasons.
Okay, so far I agree with everything you're saying, and yeah, please continue. It's making me think like we may have selected the same whiskey.
I still don't think we have.
Okay.
And so when I start thinking about my SCN pick of the year, I start thinking about the distillery. From whence it came. I start thinking about how that distillery sits with me in particular. And beyond that, I start thinking about how this distillery sits with the nation. And for me, this selection, this cask, did something that I was very, very pleased about.
Okay.
And a little surprised by, not hugely surprised, but a little surprised by. And then for me, the clincher was we have a lot of samples come in from Scotland, come in from across the United States, come in from India, come in from Wales, and we're always moving on to the next sample. Okay, that cask has been selected. Now it's going to be bottled. We move on to the next cask. We move on to the next sample. We move on to the next selection. And our eyes are always pointing down the road, into the future. And there was a rather large time difference between us selecting this cask, to us bottling this cask, to us importing this cask, to us releasing this cask. And during that extended time period, I kept dipping back into my sample of it. And I dipped again, and I dipped again, and I dipped again. And by the time we released this cask, I had an empty sample bottle of this whiskey.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so just something you couldn't get it out of your mind. You had to keep on getting it across the palate. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. I don't know what it is, though I do remember. I do recall you showing me a sample bottle and saying, I keep coming back to this. I'm going through it, and well, I don't know if there was more than one, but I do recall you saying that. I just don't recall what it was.
So let me put some more leaves on the branches,
Okay.
and you're welcome to. You'll guess this any second, but I like making this clear to the nation and to the listeners of the podcast. This distillery came online only a few decades ago, and in coming online, it instantly became near and dear to my heart because
I know
of its
what it is.
geography. And so when you and I launched Single Cask Nation with a cask from this distillery, it was very special to me.
Yeah.
And gave me a chance to start telling Americans, because that's where the company was born, and that's who we visited with when we went out and did our tastings. I was able to say, I grew up across the water from where this distillery was built and opened. And this year, when we released our third cask from this distillery, it sold out in minutes. Absolute minutes. And the fact that our nation has a soft spot for this distillery that I most definitely have a soft spot for, it felt absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
Absolutely wonderful. The fact that it was 9 years old in first fill bourbon barrel. Unfortunately, we only had just a hair over 200 bottles, which was a little sad. And the truncated label note says, reminiscent of the distillery's 18-year-old. This offering is rich and malty, buttery and fruity, with a discernible coastal salinity that serves to remind the drinker of its island genesis.
That's a love. I know that those are your tasting notes.
So go ahead and name it.
That is our Aaron 9-year-old, cask number 88.
Cask 88. Just a wonderful example of the distillery's offering. This, to me, is the platonic ideal of the Aaron distillate.
Yep. I love that. It talks to some of the things that we tried to do, right? The job of an independent bottler quite often is to show you a side of a distillery that you wouldn't normally get to see because of the distillery's own bottlings. They go in a different way flavor-wise. However, this says, hey guys, this 9-year-old says, hey guys, this is what Arran is all about. This is their DNA, and this is why we love it. Yep.
And to the point I was making earlier, in the answering of the question, are we releasing too much whiskey as an industry? There's not a lot of Arran out there. Mm-hmm. And there's not a lot of Arran at this age. And there's not a lot of Arran at this age in first fill bourbon barrels. And we are incredibly proud that we have a direct relationship with this distillery. Mm-hmm. We're one of only a few independent bottlers to whom they sell directly. Mm-hmm. And that means the world, but also the fact that they've been with us since the inception of this company is massive to me, absolutely massive, and I know it is to you too.
Oh my gosh, yes, yep,
right, absolutely massive. But to have grown up looking at the Isle of Arran across the Firth of Clyde from Ayrshire, where I was born and raised, and now to have this distillery that I feel exists within, a corner, an edge of my DNA. It's really special and really cool. So you can see why when you ask me, so what's your criteria here? It goes so far beyond texture, nose, palate, finish, and just spins out into an entire world of whiskey. It's really very special to me. I'm actually going to get emotional if I keep talking. I will say this in terms of the rules. This was a 2020 release for us. Anybody who has this bottle, and it was sold to Single Cask Nation online, it was bottled August of 2019. That's what I was saying in my build-up here. We selected it and time passed. We bottled it and time passed. We imported it and time passed. It was a long way from getting into the bottle to getting released to members. And sometimes that just happens. That's just the way the world works.
Yes, and that's very funny. Because my bottling is a somewhat similar story as far as when it was bottled. However, the label in this case is a bit incorrect, if I remember correctly. Right. So first off, I think that is a phenomenal selection for your favorite SCN or your SCN of the year. I am a bit surprised that it is an unpeated selection, given your, given you kind of lean towards peated, but it makes sense, right? I think your explanation makes perfect sense.
So let me respond to that, because you're 100% spot on here. It would have been really easy to choose our 9-year-old Isla blend. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it would have been really easy to choose that one, and that's a bottling that I most definitely reach for. But even then, even still, it's not going to make it into my honorable mention. I have another zig for my honorable mention, which I will come to after you tell us.
So my criteria, obviously, the whiskey has to be phenomenal, but like you had said, everything we bottle is something that we have tasted, that we have selected. If it's in a Single Cask Nation bottle, we've already approved of it. We already thought that it was amazing. So
yeah,
that's not even it's not even a criteria. That's not something that we should be considering. But with this one, I think back to part of the reason we started an independent bottling company, and part of the reason why we continue on as an independent bottler, is especially from the perspective of the whiskey geek, right? That's how we approach the company, from the perspective of a whiskey geek, from the perspective of someone who tastes something and says, oh my gosh, if you had this, you've got to give this a go, right? This is what a whiskey lover does. With this particular bottling, it gave us a chance to highlight a distillery and say, we love this cask, and not just because it's a great cask, but because we love what this distillery does what a fine example of what this distillery could produce. And if you've discovered this distillery through us, phenomenal. Go and try some of their own bottlings. I think that this is in part one of the reasons why distilleries will work with us directly, because we're not just independent bottlers. We're whiskey people who say, if you liked our whiskey from this distillery, please go and buy their stuff. That's what it's about. And so I didn't pick a Scotch whiskey for my favorite SCN. What do you think I picked?
No, you didn't.
What do you think I picked?
Don't tell me if I'm right or not, because I do want to continue to hear the build-up. As I was telling you before we hit the record button, I've been thinking about my answers for a week.
Yeah.
And in thinking about my answers, I've been thinking about your potential answers. And so I'm going to lay this down here, and it's now in your hand, and it's in your glass. I don't think you can change your selection to prove me wrong. But again, don't tell me if I'm correct yet. I think you picked Penderyn. I think you picked the Grand Cru Bordeaux. So continue with your build-up.
Yeah, I will. It's nice to be able to change people's minds or their perceptions about a category. One of a frustration that I've had for years is people will use the term Scotch as a shorthand for single malt. Have you tried the Japanese Scotch? Have you tried the American Scotch? And it's incredibly frustrating because the original term, at least the one that we think of, is single malt Scotch whiskey, right? There's 4 different words there. Single malt doesn't necessarily mean it's whiskey produced in Scotland. It means that single malt was produced in Scotland, but not all single malt is produced in Scotland. And so for me, it's nice to be able to say, look, Scotland has made and continues to make some of the best whiskeys in the world. Please check it out. Other countries are following suit. And not only are they producing phenomenal single malts, but they're showing you single malt in a way that you've not experienced it before. And like Chris Udy had said, we've had him on the podcast, just the one time. But I think about this quite a lot. I think about world producers as increasing the flavor pie, as adding flavors to the bouquet of flavors, different flowers to your bouquet, right? And I personally think Penderyn does a phenomenal job of this. And our whiskey, I think, does everything I wanted our first Penderyn to do. The distillery DNA is there, but then we throw you the curveball of the Grand Cru Bordeaux.
Yeah.
This sold out lickety split. Right?
Right? It's the same idea as the Arran, right? We have nation members who will sell out a Welsh single malt in minutes.
In minutes. And think about Penderyn's rise within the U.S. They came to the U.S. in the earlier 2000s or mid-ish 2000s through an importer, a very large importer, that unfortunately was too big for them. So their massive launch into the U.S. unfortunately fizzled out. And it went away. But then it was reintroduced through Impex. And this isn't a commercial for Impex, but my point is it's a much smaller importer that can focus on the brand and put the spotlight on them that this distillery deserves. And I love that we played a little part in that. And I wanted to read something to you.
All right.
We treat all of our distillery direct relationships as a collaboration, right? We even have our logo. It's the spirit of collaboration. It's not a one-way street where we're just buying casks and saying, hey, we've bought a great cask. It's a two-way street where we're saying we want to work with you and show people why your whiskeys are so great. And we'll do it through the lens of a single cask nation bottling. And so the Penderyn relationship is a very new one to us, and I'm very proud of it, as I know you are. And as
Agreed, yep.
As a thank you, we sent just a handful of bottles to key people at the distillery. And we received an email from the CEO of the distillery, and I wanted to share this with you, and I wanted to share it with our listeners. So the subject just says, "Thank you."
Classic Welsh,
right?
Classic.
Gosh, them with their thanks. And so Stephen Davey says, "Joshua, so thoughtful." Sorry, I need to increase this font here. Jesus Christ!
Come on, old man.
I can't read.
Put
what
it on
says.
the big screen.
Let me get my spectacles out.
Man, you might have to tighten that onion on your belt.
So Stephen says, "Joshua, so thoughtful of you to send me a bottle of the Single Cask Nation bottling of Penderyn. It looks fantastic. I want to open it and drink it immediately and keep it and collect it in the same breath." What a dilemma. And this is where it gets great. It says, "I'm not given to sentimentality with single malts very often, with so many bottles passing through our hands, but you got me on this one. What can I say? To have Penderyn recognized in the U.S. through all the hard work of you, Chris and Sam being, the owners of Impex, and the team at Impex gives huge satisfaction, and your independent bottling adds another layer of credibility and recognition. Enjoy the holiday season, and I hope to see you in person in 2021. Thank you, best, Stephen." How lovely. How absolutely lovely is that email?
It's absolutely fucking amazing. And as I said with my Aaron, right? If I keep talking about this Aaron, I'm going to get emotional. Listening to Stephen's email there is emotional.
Right.
That is absolutely remarkable that the CEO of Penderyn says, "This really touches us. The way you guys did this."
Yep.
That's fucking hell, man. Fucking cheers to that.
Cheers to that, indeed. And I do have to say, I selected Penderyn as my top ASCN pick before Stephen emailed me. When you had said you had been thinking about this for a week, to be honest with you, I've had this Penderyn pick as my top SCN for the past month, 2 months.
I knew this was going to be your SCN of the year. I knew it every step of the way. This was going to be your pick of the year, and I'll be honest with you. It was in the running for mine as well, and I don't want to say I picked Aaron because I knew you wouldn't, but knowing you were going to give Penderyn the light of day, I knew I could go with my pick and not worry about Penderyn not being represented. So, yeah, Christ, man, I need to take a breath here.
Go with Lamaze.
This is why, right? I'm going to pass out in my office here. This is why you and I do what we do. Could also have picked the Whistle Pig, right? We interviewed Pete Lynch. We put up his interview way back in January of this year, and as much as he's no longer with Whistle Pig, he was a great guy. He was a great chat, and he got what we were about.
Exactly.
And the Whistle Pig was a very special collaboration. So to distance ourselves from this fucking emotional realm,
look at the. I just love how British you got. I can't deal with these emotions right now.
No, push them down and move on. Do not live in the emotional moment. That's unhealthy. I'm going to bend the rules a little.
Oh, snippity snap.
My honourable mention speaks to something that we've both been saying through our selections of Arran and Penderyn here. Is there's something that was a selection. There's a selection that nearly knocked Arran off the top spot for me, and it was brought back to my attention in the Master of Malt single cask advent calendar, which I know you don't have because I've just got too much stuff for you, and we are going to have to drive and meet at a halfway point. I'm just not going to be able to get everything to you. So that's a thing that's going to happen. But in the advent calendar, I was tasting through single cask after single cask, and it was really great to taste stuff from that boutique whiskey company. It was great to taste XOP from Douglas Lang. I tell you, there was an absolutely cracking English whiskey company selection from North Star that I'm probably going to source the bottle. I don't know if it's going to still be available, but I'm going to be sourcing the bottle for it. It was very special.
That's fantastic to hear.
Right. And then there was two of our selections in there, one of which was our blended malt that was the UK, Europe, rest of the world release. And then this other one that I'm going to make an honourable mention of because it speaks to what you and I have spoken to in this podcast already. It's almost an unpronounceable distillery. It's almost an unspellable distillery. If you walked up to a whiskey loving geek, fan, connoisseur, insert word here, they may have tasted at best a few independently bottled releases from this distillery. And as I was resampling it through the Master of Malt single cask advent calendar, it turned my head. And one of the things that you and I will do at tastings when we used to travel and we used to have tastings in front of human beings, and as we said with the Arran and as we said with the Penderyn, it can be so long from the selecting of the cask to the release of the cask to the tasting and the sharing of the cask that we almost forget what it was we selected. And we stand by our selections. We know it was a rigorous criteria through which it passed. You know, it runs the gauntlet and it survives. I couldn't help but return to this selection. And I don't have a bottle in front of me. I don't even have the little sample bottle from the advent calendar. It's downstairs. But it was our UK, Europe, rest of the world Tianinic, which I want to say was 13 years old.
Yep, 13. Yep.
It's such a wonderful, bright, fruity, textured Tianinic. And it's fucking Tianinic, right? And it was part of our first release, which meant Jess and I poured it at Glasgow's Whisky Festival November of 2019.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of a cheat here, but we released so late in the year that we then ended up selling that bottling through 2020. It's why it made it into the 2020 advent calendar for Master of Malt single casks.
Sure.
And it's why I think it's one that would have turned heads, would have got attention in that arena. And it certainly caught my attention in that arena. And so, yes, I know some of our nation members did order from the UK. They did pick up that Tianinic. A chap that we mentioned on Extra, David Feldner. I believe David Feldner picked up that Tianinic and brought it into the US. And that, to me, if we've talked about some of our US releases where something like the Milton Duff really captured people's attention, the Mac Duff really captured people's attention, the 20-year-old Glenburgie really captured people's attention. Here's one that went out overseas that I think would have caught people's attention, a Tia Ninnick.
Yeah, what an interesting cask to release in your very first UK, EU, Asia release. A Tia Ninnick, a distillery that no fucker has heard of. And if they've heard of it, they've probably said, I've never had anything, so I'll just kind of move on. Yeah, it gets back to, was it a great whiskey? Did we believe in it? Do we want to champion it? Was it necessarily the smartest cask to release as a, hey, UK, Europe, rest of the world? Probably not, but we stuck to our guns of, this is who we are, and this is what we do. What we do, that we do. We release whiskeys that we fall in love with, and if it doesn't have a sexy name, it doesn't have a sexy name.
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything you say there. Yeah. It gets to the heart of the matter, right? Tia Ninnick. You know, we love our good friend and my adoptive dad, Michael Nolan, and we love his love for Glenburgie, and it's so wonderful to meet people, and we've mentioned this other guy before, Moscow Jim, Craig Ellicky, right? I love when we encounter whiskey people, and really count them as whiskey friends, obviously, who just champion the unchampionable, right? Like when you leave Michael Nolan's house of an evening and you're telling your friends, boy, did we drink some remarkable drams. How often do you lead with the Glenburgie, right? You want to tell your friends, oh, we had a crazy Talisker and we had a wonderful Highland Park, and oh boy, did he pull out a Lagavulin. You want to tell your friends the things they recognize, right? And I want us in 2021 to say, I had a Glenburgie, I had a Craig Ellicky, I had a Tia Ninnick, I had an Thrusk, right? I had a Glen Elgin, to get back to our own bloody podcast, right? That's what I want nation members, and I count them globally now, nation members to say, I'm going to take a distillery under my wing and I'm going to make sure my friends know about it.
Yep. Well, at this point, I need to thank you. I need to thank you.
Oh boy, I was just waiting for your honorable mention, but please do not allow me to get in your way here.
Well, we wouldn't have an honorable mention if it weren't for you.
Go on.
Because just like Michael Nolan has his fetish for Glenburgie, and
that is the correct word.
Right? And Moscow Jim has his fetish for Craig Ellicky, and then Chris Sweener out of Massachusetts has his fetish for Amra, right? You know, granted, Amra is a much larger known distillery, and they have their own bottlings, but still, you know, getting back to people who think of, man, I like that Scotch, right? There's a lot of people that still don't know Amra. And there are people that...
absolutely, yeah.
Right, and people that will champion them and will go out of their way to speak the gospel, if you will.
Which we discussed with Raj in his episode in 2020.
Perfect. And so I need to thank you, because the gospel that I've been trying to spread for the past 12 plus years since before I knew you was that Imperial produced some of the best whiskey around. And you like Imperial well enough, but it's soft.
Yeah, I like it well enough.
Right? It's softer. It's a bit more gentle. It's got more minerality. It's just, it doesn't always tick all of your boxes. But, and you said this in a previous episode, you've always trusted my gut on some things. And when we started getting access to Imperial, I would always love them more than you. Of course, you would see them as great whiskeys, and you'll say, of course, I'm going to put the Single Cask Nation name on it.
Yes.
But where I'm like clamoring, I just more and more Imperial, we have to do this. You're like, yeah, okay, that'll be okay. That'll do. Mm-hmm. You're not the one driving the bus when it comes to Imperial. I am. But you're saying,
I am not.
Take it away, driver. And so I'm going to bend the rules a little bit here and say I've got...
Thank God it's our podcast.
I have 2 honorable mentions. My first honorable mention.
But that's really unfair because we could list honorable mentions all day long around here.
But once I say it, you'll understand why. Yep, there you go. The
Okay,
Imperial...
I'm gonna pour a little
Yeah,
then.
please.
Since you're bending the rules, I'm going to need some whiskey to get me through this.
So the honorable mention is our 30-year-old Imperial, which was bottled under our Woodcut series, right? People may or may not remember. If they've heard about it or had it, they will remember our 30-year-old Bowmore, which was the first in our Woodcut series. And then we did our 30-year-old Imperial, which I have to say, as much as I love it, it is not my favorite Imperial. It is my 3rd favorite Imperial. And you'll understand why once I get there. I'm proud of this one for a few reasons. I'm proud that we were able to put out a 30-year-old that is
Oh, yes.
so beautiful, so glorious, and we were able to put it out at $395.
Exactly. Yep. I knew you were going to identify price on this because Imperial, and you're an opener, a drinker, a collector of Imperial. That just got a lot harder for you in 2020. Prices on Imperial are going north rapidly.
Through the roof. Through the friggin' roof. And it's unfortunate, but it's understandable at the same time. It's a demolished distillery. These things are just going to happen. But I'm proud of this, and I'm proud of the price. But it is my 3rd favorite Imperial. And as someone who has been drinking... Go on. Yeah.
No.
Okay.
Is it your 3rd favorite of 2020, or is your 3rd favorite Imperial of all your Imperials?
It's my 2nd favorite Imperial of 2020, but my 3rd favorite Imperial of all time.
Lord. Oh my God, I need an abacus and a spreadsheet. Okay. Uh-huh.
And so I'm going to pour a little bit of this myself. And so my first favorite Imperial is something that I don't have here, but I really feel as if this is the best Imperial I've ever tasted. And
to new listeners, welcome to our inaugural episode of One Nation Under Imperial, a new podcast, a 4th podcast from Joshua and Jason, where Jason listens to Joshua talk about all of his Imperials.
So my first favorite Imperial is the 24-year-old that we just released for UK Rest of the World. That single cask of Imperial, why the broker sold it to us, I will never know. I will just say thank you, because that is, by and large, the best Imperial I have ever tasted. And not because we bottled it. It just simply is the best Imperial that I've ever tasted. And it had knocked my favorite Imperial of all time down to place number 2, and that's the 15-year-old Malt Trust, which was my gateway Imperial.
I remember you saying that. Yep. Didn't you just recently pick up another bottle of that to have in the bunker?
I did indeed, and I only have the one now.
Remember the things you text me?
So there you go. That's my honorable mention, and
so just to be clear,
yep.
The honorable mention of your SCN release of 2020 is the 24-year-old Imperial released to UK, Europe, rest of the world, release number 2.
Correct. And I only bring up the 30-year-old because what an age to be able to have access to bottle. And then even in the midst of a pandemic, in the midst of 25% tariffs to the U.S., we were able to release this whiskey at $395. That's why it fits into the honorable mention. That's why I allow it to bend the rules a little bit, because it allows us to highlight what we try to do at all times, is to do a solid for our nation members.
100%.
Right?
Yep. 100%.
Yep.
I'm going to take a quick break here to replenish my water, trip to the bathroom, see if there's any coffee left in the pot, and I will be back.
All right.
Thanks for waiting for me there, Joshua. Life is good again. I have finished the... Oh, I'm giving the game away here.
Oh, wow. God, I love the sound of that.
Yeah, that's a tight one. That's a kind of cork on that one.
Okay, hold on. Yeah, so I haven't seen the label, but I
Are
have...
you're looking at too much here.
Well, I've seen bits and bobs, which gives me an idea as to the bottler.
Yes, I think you could guess that even just by that cork alone. I think you could guess the bottler. But
and knowing the distilleries that you love, I have I have a hard time. Oh, let me put this a different way. Let me put this in an even different way. Knowing the distilleries that you love, it's very difficult for me to think outside of that potential box of distilleries that you will have chosen your favorite whiskey of the year from.
Non-SCN category.
Non-SCN.
I don't want it to sound like SCN exists as its own participation trophy category.
This is as we've been using this term somewhat frequently. It was kind of like quid pro quo in the news just a few months back. We use this term writ large. So whiskey category writ large.
Yes, writ large.
This whiskey is from I assume, and I don't think I'm making an ass out of me, maybe out of you, but I assume that this is from a distillery that is quite obvious you would select a whiskey from.
Very obvious. Very obvious.
Perhaps
yes, my
too
camera
obvious?
points my camera points the other direction. But if it was pointing towards the door to my office, you would see the shelving unit that contains this distillery.
And now I know exactly what it is.
Yeah. Oh, but here's the thing. I still don't think you know the cask.
Oh, that's a good point. Because this particular bottler this particular company has a few different labels that they could bottle under.
Correct.
And so this is a whiskey bottling from Elixir Distillers / Specialty Drinks / The Whiskey Exchange, correct? Okay.
Indeed.
And so I knew that because of the black wax on top.
And this super tight cork.
Super
tight cork.
Super tight cork.
Is a calling card of the Whiskey Exchange.
Okay.
Oh gosh, I'm just nosing this as you're talking. The reason I'm so quiet right now, A, I'm enjoying listening to you. But B, I'm just nosing the shit out of this. It's so good. And I'm turning it in my glass, and I'm also looking at the oils building around the Glencairn on this one as well.
So I'm gonna go a bit deeper. Hold on a second. I need to grab my own bottle. I'm gonna go a bit deeper. Now, what our listeners don't have the luxury of is being able to see you, right? We're always looking at one another when we record. And so you did give away a little bit of a hint, and that little bit of a hint was a black waxed top. And I think that the Whiskey Exchange only uses that black wax top when they bottle something under the Whiskey Exchange label.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, the top of my label does match the one that you're showing there. Yep.
Okay. And now I assume that it's also single malt Scotch whiskey. Am I right there?
It is. Right. It is. It is. It is.
And I'm going to guess that the distillery you're about to mention is not the one on my label.
You are correct, although I do have that label because you bought me a bottle and it's in my closet.
I did. Have you opened yours yet?
No, remember I said I'm taking it to malt stock.
You did say you're taking it to malt stock. That's right. So the one that I have, and mine's not open yet, is 21-year-old Glen Talkers. So, and to be fair to you, Glen Talkers is one of your most beloved distilleries.
Correct. It's my Glenburgie or my Craigellachie.
Yeah, exactly.
Glen Talkers is very special, and I love introducing people to Glen Talkers when we lead Whiskey Geek tours. Our very good friends, James and Martha Foster, reached out over email during this Festivus to say, do you guys still run Whiskey Geek tours?
Ooh.
To which I said, yes, we most definitely do, just not during the global pandemic. I don't know if we'll run any in 2021, but all going according to plan, which, haha, everyone laughs at that statement. 2022 Whiskey Geek Tours will return.
It will return. So, do you mind me going down this route? I'm basically playing 20 questions with myself while you just nod.
Myself.
Okay.
I'm more than happy to keep nosing and drinking this whiskey while you talk.
And so, my guess is that this is a single cask. This is not a vatting of a few different casks, right? Okay.
Correct. It is a single cask. Okay. Oh, yes, 100% single cask.
And I mentioned this before. You have you kind of lean toward peated whiskeys.
I do. I tell people in my tastings, they fill my soul.
Would you say if you could before because I'm kind of dragging this out. I feel like Sting during a sexual encounter. I'm really dragging this out here. If tomorrow you no longer had access to any unpeated whiskey, would you be okay with that?
I wouldn't be okay with it. No, I would definitely miss it. I just made my SCN of the year as an unpeated Arran. My second, my honourable mention was an unpeated Tianinic. No, I love, again, I say this in all my tastings, I love drinking point, counterpoint. And so I love having access to unpeated whiskey because it reminds me just how much I love peated whiskey.
Yeah.
And yes, I love Kilchoman. That's one of my shelving units. And yes, I love this distillery, which you correctly identified, Lechig, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Lechig is my other shelving unit, right? I love those two peated expressions, but I love our Penderyn. I love our Arran. I love our Tianinic. I love our Imperials, right? I love our Whistlepig. I love our Cadalton Grey. I could go on and on and on and on and on about unpeated offerings. So no, I would not be okay if unpeated offerings went away tomorrow.
So I was trying to extend the whole reveal, but you listed it right there. It is a Lechig. It's bottled by the Whiskey Exchange. So why is this? First, talk to us about this cask.
Yeah.
And then tell us why this is this is your favorite non-single cask nation whiskey of the year, and why?
Yeah. So you and I were excited to get back to malt stock this year. And because of the global pandemic, because of 2020, we did not make it to malt stock. However, we participated in an online malt stock along with Jess. And at that malt stock, we listened to Billy Abbott, who's a wonderful, wonderful human being. I was just describing him yesterday to a friend, and he is whiskey knowledge on legs, but he's also coffee knowledge on legs, and he's also geek culture knowledge on legs. He's a wonderful human being and a wonderful chap to listen to and spend time with, and it's really sad when we don't get to do that, as we've talked about 2020, when we don't get to hang out with people that we just simply love being around.
And
Please add.
Just back to the point about Billy Abbott. He's also a wonderful hugger. I miss hugging Billy, seeing him, getting a good hug, and then just talking about whiskey, or just there are few people that know more about spirits in general than him, and it's just like it's like living like a sponge near him. It's wonderful.
Yep, agreed wholeheartedly.
Yep.
He's such a good lad.
Yep.
So he presented this whiskey at this online malt stock event. And
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
And while he had me at Lechig, the way he went on to describe it, and I'm going to pause on the description. Their truncated label note is absolutely captivating and absolutely spot on as well. But the way he described it, you and I were texting back and forth, right? How many bottles of this you getting? How many bottles of that you getting? And as it turned out, we actually never placed an order for any of them.
No.
Which is really not like us at all.
At all.
And-
At all. Yeah.
Right? But, as we like to say, a seed was sown. And so a month, 2 months, a few months later, I was placing a whiskey exchange order. And the seed that had been sown by Billy had grown, had germinated. And I added a bottle of this to my order. Because I'm a Lechig, independently bottled Lechig collector, which also means opener, which also means drinker, right? The same way you are with Imperial.
Exactly.
And I got this bottle and I opened it immediately. I literally pulled it from the box and pulled the wax and popped the cork and poured it into a glass.
Love it. Yes.
And started drinking it. And I was absolutely floored with it. And I have since added this bottling to subsequent whiskey exchange orders because I knew how much I loved it at that point. And so this is a sherry butt Lechig distilled in 2005, and we may have bent the rules again. It was bottled in 2019.
Hold on. I need to pause you right there. How on God's green earth was this bottled in 2019, and then at the whiskey show, Billy is waxing lyric. Where was it again?
Maltstock.
At Maltstock, sorry.
Maltstock.
And then at Maltstock, just this past September, granted it was an online Maltstock, but anyway, at Maltstock, Billy is waxing lyrical about it. And we still didn't buy any. And then 2 months later, you did buy some, and it's a single cask. Now, granted, it's a butt, so you have more bottles.
622.
But the people who are selecting the Whiskey Exchange stuff, the Single Malts of Scotland stuff, the Whiskey Trail stuff, the list goes on with their labels. They're some of the people that we hold in the absolute highest regard for having the best palates there are. And that's just sitting around? How is that sitting around? I'm buying one right now, Jason. You talk your story. I'm buying one right now.
Okay, Joshua.
Don't you tell me it's sold out.
Joshua.
Yeah.
Do not. I think it is sold out, but don't hit the purchase button because I need to finish my story.
Okay, you finish your story.
Promise me if it's available, you will not hit the purchase button.
I promise you that I will hit.
Promise me that.
I will hit the purchase button if it's available. I promise.
Don't do that.
I won't hesitate in hitting the purchase button.
Stop doing what you're doing.
Loud
Only
and
look
clear.
at this camera.
Okay.
Only look at me.
Yep, got it.
Only look at me.
Yep.
So this was actually
Add to
a
cart.
13-year-old.
Yep.
It was a 13-year-old when it was bottled. And so it was probably an early 2019 bottling. But listen to this.
Go ahead.
This is at 57.4% alcohol
Good
from
ABV.
a sherry butt.
Good ABV.
This is the truncated tasting note on the label. Smoky mango with a hint of TCP and damp grass. Chocolate lime sweets follow with licorice and rich peat. If you were to take my list of things I want in Lechig, those are, I would say, 4 out of the 5. I also want a salinity. I also want boat ropes. Those are things that I'm looking for in Lechig, which you're clearly not necessarily going to get in a sherry butt. So the chocolate lime note is so good and so accurate and so well done. But the licorice, when I sit quietly with a glass of this, the licorice really gets me every time. This is such a good bottling of Lechig, and it's so good. I bought you a bottle for your birthday, which was December 6th.
Aww.
And, and because of the postal system, I did not send it to you for your birthday. But in your box of bottles that we need to drive to meet each other because I've got so much for you, there's a bottle of this.
Oh, gosh, that makes
Cheers
me...
to your belated birthday.
Cheers, man. That makes me feel really, really, really good and special. And you know, as you're listing out these tasting notes, I think of the character that Adam Sandler once played. In the old Adam Sandler albums, he played a character called the Buffoon. And one time, again, back to thinking of those tasting notes, one time the Buffoon had said,
I've got a big fucking boner right now.
and it always, and I thought it was apropos.
Well, I am so glad that I pulled the bottle that I did for your birthday because finally, eventually, somewhat wondrously and fantastically, this is sold out on the Whisky Exchange website. 622 bottles have finally all found homes, and 3 of them made their way to this house, where 1 is open, 1 is for your birthday, and 1 is unopened for me to replenish the open bottle that I have been sharing far and wide. You know the size of a Johnston pour.
Damn, son.
I have half a bottle of this open one remaining because I'm sharing it far and wide.
Good.
It is a phenomenal Lechig.
Good. Oh, I cannot wait. And thank you for getting me a bottle.
You're very welcome, sir. I knew you would love it.
So my whiskey of the year is surprisingly an OB.
That's good to hear.
It is good
That
to
is
hear.
good to hear. It did not cross my mind in making any of my selections, but that's good to hear.
But however, it is a single cask. But it's a single cask.
Of course.
Bottled by the distillery themselves. And I'm going to put another little wrinkle in here and letting you know that as much as I love this distillery, and I do, they're so near and dear to my heart, I don't think that I've ever selected them as a whiskey of the year or even in my top 3. I think this distillery has put out whiskeys that have appeared on my top 10 lists a few times. And it is not, and it's not because they make whiskey that's, subpar compared to another distillery. It's just that's the way I tasted that year, right? And it's just you put everything together, and bottles will lie where bottles will lie. This one has made my whiskey of the year, and see, I'm afraid when I say this that it may give away things.
Go ahead and say it.
This whiskey was matured in a type of cask that I think this distillery spirit, for the most part, for my own tastes, does not work with.
Have you pulled a Kilchoman?
I've pulled a Kilchoman.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow. Okay.
Okay, but you haven't pulled the pheno matured Kilchoman, have you?
I have not. I have not pulled a pheno
Because it's a
matured.
single cask, and that's not
Correct.
a single cask.
Correct.
Yes.
And that is a wild whiskey. And I'll be very honest here. I think the Kilchoman pheno cask is fun. Right? It's doing a lot of fun things. But I wouldn't necessarily say that it is a great whiskey. I think it's a fun whiskey. And I wouldn't necessarily reach out for it to say, I'm in need of that Kilchoman and pheno. I think it's a whiskey that when you have friends over, or if you're, putting together a tasting kit and sending it out to people, that you say, this is fun. You should try it with these other ones because it's going to stand out for reasons A, B, and C. And so
I bought a couple of bottles of it,
I'm
but
glad
I
you
haven't
did.
received them yet.
I'm glad you did because it is such a fun and unusual whiskey, right? It's one of those ones where you say, "Now try this." And sometimes you're saying that because it's a terrible whiskey, but sometimes you're saying it's just this is so unusual. It's so out of left field. You got to give it a go. And the whiskey that I pick was not out of left field, at least as far as the distillery character goes. I think that this 100% falls within the distillery's DNA. But the fact that it was, and I'll give you another hint, it was finished in this style of cask. I think the spirit benefited from a finish rather than a full maturation in this cask.
And was it bottled for a retail store in Chicago?
It is the 8-year-old Madeira finished single cask for Warehouse Liquors.
Which I am now reaching for on my Kilchoman shelving unit.
There you go. See that? I love that we're sharing these whiskeys.
So I have
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I have 7 shelves on my Kilchoman unit. And not only was this bottling that you chose right in the middle of top to bottom all the shelving units, but it was also center within the shelf. You have picked
Yep.
the center bottling, top to bottom and left to right, on my shelving unit.
Bam. Wham. Jason, I need to... This isn't extra, it's all about whiskey. But the TTB just announced some of the most amazing news right now.
Okay.
This is insane. Like, this is absolutely insane.
Okay.
Standards of Fill Final Rule published. On December 29th, 2020, we will publish the final rule in Federal Register that, among other things, amends the TTB's rulings that govern the wine and distilled spirits containers by adding 7 new standards of fill for wine and distilled spirits. And so a new standard filling, there's 4 of them for distilled
50
spirits.
CL is coming, baby. 50
It's not 50 CL. Are you ready? For distilled spirits, 700 milliliter.
Oh!
Is that crazy? We're getting 700.
What?
Logistically, our lives became, oh my gosh, so much easier.
What?
So the U.S. will now recognize 70 CL / 700 milliliter bottlings, 720 milliliter, that's a weird one, 900 milliliter, and are you ready for this? 1.8 liter. As of tomorrow, that will officially go into play. The U.S. will accept 700 milliliter bottles, which some people, I can already hear it, right? People listening to this podcast may say, well, that sucks. They're just going to screw us out of the extra, 50 milliliters or 50 CL.
And I am one of those people.
And I am one of those people as well. However, think about how many of the bottlings we in the U.S. have missed out on because they were bottled exclusively in 700 milliliter bottles.
That's remarkable. I hadn't even heard a whisper of this happening.
Oh, really? No, that's not true. You and I had talked about it being proposed to the TTB.
Okay.
It may not have made it onto any episode. It could have been just in a drinking session. But that is breaking news as of this morning, Jason.
Breaking news aside, Joshua.
Yeah.
Talk to me about why you think, and I know you said the distillery character still runs through it, but what do you think Madeira maturation brings to Kilchoman that made this your 2020 non-SCN Whiskey of the Year?
Well, let me back it up a little bit, as I'm often wont to do.
I'd expect nothing less. Back away. Beep, 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 beep.
I think it was in either 2015 or 2017. I'm trying to remember, but Kilchoman had their, as they do every year. At the end of the year, they release their, unusual cask matured whiskey. In 2016, it was the Madeira. Oh, that's right. In 2017, it was the red wine cask and so on. So I think 2015 was the Madeira one. And it's just highlighting the distillery spirit in a different cask type to show you what their spirit does in those different casks, right? And when I tasted the Madeira one, while the majority of people enjoyed that bright freshness that Kilchoman brings to the heavy earthiness of Madeira, right? People would drink that and they say, "Oh, that's nice. It's nice because the bright freshness balances out the earthiness and vice versa." And to me, for my palate, I thought they were fighting. I didn't love the bottling, but right, everybody's palates are different. And so since then, I've been really nervous about Madeira cask matured or cask finished Kilchoman because I just had assumed the two, for my palate, are oil and water. They just don't fit.
Yep. Like port for me and port for you in a lot of ways. It's oil and water.
Yep. Perfect. And so it was December of...
And to be clear, port matured or port finished, not port. We both love port.
Yep.
Its influence on whiskey.
That's a good clarification. Thank you. And so for me, back in December of 2019, I was at the distillery. I was on Isla for my birthday, along with Swede Scott's birthday, along with Jess Lomas's birthday. They were celebrating their Project 1989. They had both turned 30 in 2019, so I was there helping them celebrate. But I can't enjoy vacation without working a little bit, so I went to the distillery and I selected 3 casks. One for Warehouse Liquors, one for the New York market, and one for Astor Wines in New York. And when I say I selected them, I mean I selected casks that I thought would do well for them. They had every right to say, no, I don't like this, right?
Yeah.
And for the New York one and the Astor ones, I had a directive. I knew exactly what to look for those particular, for that market and for that shop. But for Warehouse Liquors in Chicago, I didn't have a directive. all I had was me knowing Gene's palate and what Gene may or may not like.
Yep.
And so we're tasting through these casks, and Anthony Wills says a couple of times, he says, and over there we have our Madeira finish stuff. And I kept on politely ignoring him because I thought to myself, I'm not going to do that to Gene. Gene and I thought, had similar palates, and I was afraid to present something to him that he wouldn't like. But at the same time, when Anthony Wills, the owner of the distillery, says you need to try these out, you should not be rude. So I decided not to be rude, and I said, you know what, let's give these a go. And holy shit, if two of them were not wonderful, with one of them being remarkable. And so I gave Gene, I think it was maybe 3 or 4 samples, and the one that I thought was remarkable, he said, Joshua, this is just astounding whiskey, and I need the whole cask. And so he got it. It was bottled for him, put a sticker on it. Boom, Bob's your uncle. And of course, I needed a bottle, and I bought 2, one for you, one for me. And now I need more because now granted, I'm drinking this alone, so there's not a lot missing, but I'm also drinking it as if this is the last bottle of it I have. It is so fucking remarkable. This does everything I want Kilchoman to do and more. It took me out of my comfort zone thinking Kilchoman doesn't do well in Madeira. It proved me wrong. I love it when something proves me wrong. And
Well, Joshua, allow me to prove you wrong.
God
please.
Damn it. God damn it.
Please. If you're going to open that door, I'm going to walk right through it. You said to me,
Oh, shit.
Jason,
All right.
you need a bottle of this. You need a bottle of this. And I reached out to Michael Nolan, who lives in Chicago, who is, very familiar with warehouse liquors. And Michael Nolan purchased me a bottle of this and sent it to me. You, sir, if you picked up a bottle for you and a bottle for me, have been working your way through the 2 bottles that you purchased from Gene.
So
I love your face on this. I love.
well, so then I must imagine that I bought 2, and you'd said don't worry about buying me one because I always think of you. Whenever I buy whiskey, I'm thinking, does Jason need this one? And so I'm thinking you and I must have spoken, and you said you're already getting one. So maybe I got that one for Jared. Shit, man, I don't remember.
Jared doesn't like Kilchoman in wine. He just doesn't like it. I was telling him about the Southern California Whiskey Club bottling that you and I picked up, and he just doesn't like it in wine. He wants ex-bourbon. Because I was telling him about this one. I was telling him he had to get this bottle from Gene, but then listening to how he talked about Kilchoman in wine, I was like, well, maybe you don't, so don't worry about it. So you may very well have a couple to work through there. I also want to throw in that I think I own all 3 of the casks that you selected on that trip then.
You do. Yep.
Because I've got your Astor bottling, I've got your New York Market bottling, and I've got your Warehouse Liquors bottling.
I definitely sent you the Astor and the New York one. One of them.
You did.
One of them, I think. Oh, one of them's on Jess's birthday, right? One of them, cast number 794, if I'm not mistaken, for Astor, or it might be cask 316. Anyway. So you and I, sir, have revealed our top whiskey of the year. We're also almost 2 hours into this podcast. I'm not rushing us. And I doubt our listeners are either, or at least the ones who have stuck around thus far. What, sir, is your wild card of the year?
So I'm not prepared to answer that question just now. I am sitting here sipping on your Madeira finish. selection from Kilchoman
Phenomenal, right?
with Jean for Warehouse. And I'm going to continue to sip on this and enjoy this. I'm going to use this time to tell you about my favorite episodes. And then I will swing back around to my wild card. And then potentially you are going to throw in your new wrinkle of a question for this podcast as well.
Okay.
And I'm firmly convinced that by the time you edit this, we're not pushing 2 hours at this point. I think we're pushing an hour and 3/4 at this point.
You, sir, are hilarious. But continue.
I think we got some time in the tank, as they say. Favorite episodes. I'm going to say it first because I think on this one we're probably going to pick the same.
Can we say that? Can we say it on the count of three? Let's do it on the count of three to see if we're one and the same.
I know what I'm going to say on the count of three.
Okay, just say the person's name. Okay.
No, but you're going to like what I say. Let you do the countdown.
3, 2, 1. Will Oldham.
I was selecting our wives takeover episodes so that you would feel confident in picking the Will Oldham episode.
What's interesting is both of those episodes are not necessarily whiskey focused. Isn't that interesting?
Correct. Yeah. But you've said this earlier on the podcast. You and I are in the 4th season of this. We're only a couple of months, really just 6 weeks away from closing out the 4th season and then opening the doors on the 5th season of One Nation Under Whisky. We've never received more positive feedback than we received for the wife takeover.
Never, ever. Yep.
That episode, and even I think as recently as last week, you forwarded me a text from somebody who was waxing lyrical about the wife takeover, and so
yep.
it has been a remarkable episode that has had such wonderful legs, and even as new feedback comes in, and I tell my wife Tamara about it, she smiles. And she continues on with what she's been doing in that moment. Yeah. That was such a fantastic experience. And I think it really spoke to, there's you and me, and there's Jess, and there's whoever we add in 2021. But at all times, and for the last decade, there have been our wives. And I think our listeners, our nation members, our fans, our followers, whatever word we choose to insert here, have been so intrigued by the women who support our efforts and our endeavors within this field, that when they finally had a chance to talk, people wanted to hear what they had to say, but then they were also funny. And they got to see, they also hold our feet to the fire on things. And they say, if you're going to do this, don't do this by half measures. And our listeners having a chance to hear from them directly was a really wonderful moment in 2020. So that's my number one episode from this year. And gosh, I don't just have one honorable mention. I have multiple honorable mentions, as we always do in trying to pick a favorite from the year. So those are my reasons for selecting the wifely takeover. But give us your reasons for Will Oldham.
Well, the wifely takeover was definitely my honorable mention. There's no doubt about it. And for all of the reasons that you've listed. The Will Oldham one being my favorite episode is, well, for many reasons, right? Just like for my favorite SCN bottle or runner-up, or my favorite my number one whiskey bottle. There are multiple reasons. And so with Will Oldham, you and I reached out to Will a good year before we actually interviewed him. And we sent an email out to his publicist and received nothing back, unfortunately. And then just decided to try again. And then 2 days later, Will Oldham emailed us directly.
Well, yeah, that was... You're talking about this question coming later in the episode being a wrinkle. Will just writing back to us after we'd already had a failed exploration. What a wrinkle. What a winkle. What a wrinkle that was.
So I wasn't... The question that I have that throws a wrinkle into things has nothing to do with what our favorite episode is.
No, I know. Okay. I know. I'm just saying, you've got me saying wrinkle now when I've probably gone about 3 years without using the word wrinkle in this context. Yeah. You've now put it into my head and I'm using it constantly.
But do you use, I imagine you use the word wrinkle any and every time you look in the mirror, right?
Am I correct in saying that this Madeira cask has a little pink tinge to it?
It's got a wee pink tinge. The color is not too far off from our Penderyn Grand Cru Bordeaux cask.
Yeah.
So
I'm just gonna ignore your offensive statement now.
So the which one? Anyway, so the the emailing of Will Oldham was a pipe dream. It's one of those things that I felt as if we were on a boat, and we said, okay, we're on a boat. And everyone has told us that there's no fish in this lake. But we're going to throw a line out anyway and see what happens. And then all of a sudden, we got a bite. Like I never, in my wildest dreams, thought that someone like Will Oldham would say, yeah, I'm interested in talking with you. The fact that he said, yes, I'll talk with you. And the fact that he said, come to my house. Let's have a conversation over whiskey. His music is so dear to me. And I felt as if we were in the position of, didn't they always say, don't meet your idols? and I was nervous that we would meet Will and that he would be a weirdo or an a-hole or, just someone we didn't get on with, but we totally got on with
difficult.
Or difficult.
Or esoteric.
Or what have you. And it was just a pretty straightforward conversation that was just so lovely to be a part of. And the conversation continues, right? I mean, this single recording of this podcast continues to have legs. And I listen back to it every now and again, and I just love hearing Will being thoughtful about music, about being thoughtful about whiskey and what whiskey is doing to his state, and how he feels that there's a good bit of disingenuousness happening. There's less whiskey and more marketing happening. And it was great to hear his perspective because he's outside of the industry. He's just a Kentucky resident seeing what it's doing around him. And that was wonderful to hear. And I'll end it with this. The reason why this is my number one, the fact that he sang an a cappella song to us and continued to sing a second song to us knowing that we could not air it. There's another song out there that no one else has heard except for maybe you, me, Haida, and I imagine you played it for Tamara.
I don't have the audio of it. Only you have the audio of it. I couldn't play it for Tamara.
Oh shit, I've got to send it to you.
But if you want to send it to me, I would gratefully receive it. So thank you very much.
Because it's remarkable. It really is.
Could we post the audio to our Single Cast Nation members only Facebook group?
I wouldn't.
It's because of the content or because of the copyright?
Because of the copyright.
It's a private group. Nobody has access to the private group.
is the internet, Jason.
That's a good point.
Yeah, it's a good
That's
point.
a good point.
Yep.
It is the internet.
Yeah,
You are right there.
It's the internet.
Bootleg.
Yeah.
Come on, bootleg. It's a bootleg tape. Come on. You can find a way. You're smart. You're smart.
Yeah, I'm so smart that I'm going to keep it to us, and our listeners will just sit there wanting.
As you talk about expectations around that interview and might it be weird or difficult or esoteric, I feel like the pandemic already took care of that. We pitched up in our masks. We made it from his front door to his back door to get onto the deck. And then we sat 6 feet apart. Mm-hmm. And then we removed our masks. And we didn't move within that 6 feet buffer.
Nope.
And then when it was over and we'd had some drams and we talked some whiskey and we had a great conversation, we put our masks back on and we walked through his house and we exited in our respective cars. There was already a weirdness to it as supplied by the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And I think we sought out, all three of us sought out a certain normality as we sat there within the interview and allowed the pandemic to rage around us as we sought normalcy, a very American word, within that interview, within that setting, within that context. And I wonder if that made it slightly more accessible, normal, but it was still wonderful. It was still a wonderful conversation, and it was still interesting. It was still fascinating, and yeah, those a cappella recordings just remarkable.
Yeah, and it's funny, and of course he likely will not be listening to this episode. I'm sure he's not, listening in 2 hours in, but
he's not.
I have spoken with Will many times over the years. And by speaking with, I mean I've said a sentence to him. And it's been the same sentence to him every time I would bump into him. I'd go, because he likes playing smaller venues sometimes. And so there have been a few times where I've just simply bumped into him in the toilet. And
it's the place you hang out.
It's the place I hang out.
You're in the toilet.
Or he comes off the stage and he's walking away or something like that, and I say the same thing to him every time, and I'll say, "It's a really awesome set, Will." And the fact that I got to just spend an hour and a half with him, where he said something back to me other than "Thanks, man," was really special. So.
Yeah, he said the toilet's just left off the kitchen. You can't miss it. He knows what you live for, Joshua Hatton. He knows. It's interesting as I listen to you talking about how you felt speaking to Will Oldham, and in 2019 I obviously felt the same way in speaking to Dave Broom when we were just chatting in the new Kilholman Visitor Centre. Mm-hmm. That was a real special moment. Really and obviously in 2020, we brought Dave back for a second time, and we've already scheduled him for a third time. And I think that will make him the only person to be on One Nation Under Whiskey 3 times.
For their own episode, yes. Right, we've done some Whiskey Jubilee sort of recap episodes where we've had guests on, right? Yeah. But yeah, that's
I still don't think there's anybody even in that context who's been on 3 times. But when you and I sat down in London, in the tasting room, in the blending room of Compass Box, and chatted with John Glazer, it's so interesting that you say, every time I saw Will Oldham in concert and he would walk off stage and I would say, "Great set, Will." And he would say, "Thanks, man." I had only had the same experience with John Glazer, where I had been at festivals with him or presentations with him. And I was always so impressed by him. And in passing by him, I would say, great talk, John, or great presentation, John. And he would say, thanks, man. Right?
That's so great.
We got to sit down with him and explore this world in which we inhabit. And that to me, we really did. We had very special guests. Carol Lang was a highlight for me. Stephanie McLeod was a highlight for me.
Mm-hmm.
Kirsty McCallum was a highlight for me.
Yep, wonderful.
So many great whiskey chats with people, and doing it during COVID, where we had to say, look, we're not going to do this in person. We're not going to get a dram. With John, we did. It was January in London. COVID hadn't arrived just yet, although we do now have a sense that COVID had arrived just then. But we launched season 4, episode 1 with John Glazer. And that was so special for me. Really, really tremendously special. That I look back on that with such a fondness. And if we're looking for an honourable mention, I simply cannot move beyond that John Glazer episode.
Yeah, so firstly, I think you're spot on. He like Dave Broom for you is another person where I would say I'd be almost scared to talk to them and do exactly what you did, because it's John fucking Glazer, right? Now, the Wives episode is most definitely my honorable mention. However, I think it bears mentioning that in 2020, you and I launched a second podcast, Extra Extra. It's all about whiskey, and we did 20 episodes for people, just doing a tight 30 minutes, sometimes 35, and I
sometimes 62,
sometimes
minutes
62. But I think that was overall such a great addition to the podcast we do, and allowed us to, we forced ourselves to focus on whiskey and focus on a singular subject regarding whiskey, and that's not easy for us to do, given our propensity to just want to get, just to follow this tangent and that tangent, and people have really been following the Extra Extra. Our download rates, our streaming rates are up there, along with our One Nation Under Whiskey download and streaming rates, which is very good to hear. It makes me feel good. So I'm going to throw that in as a secondary honorable mention.
Oh, nice. So here comes my secondary honourable mention. And it's again along the lines of, when otherwise would you have a chance to talk to this person?
Oh, right. When would you? Okay. Is it Dr. Daniel Whiteson?
It's not, but
not.
he would be among my honourable mentions, because that was a great episode, and we didn't, tangentially connected to whiskey, but no, this person, it was 100% whiskey focused, and you and I sat back and listened for over the course of the interview.
Oh, okay. So if it's someone you just sit back and listen to, it's got to be Richard Seal of Foursquare.
It's not, but that was another highlight of the year. Yeah. That was a great conversation. I'm going to give the game away to you here. It happened at the same time we were in London for John Glazer.
Fuck. You're making me go back in time to when time made sense. Was it James Saxon? Was it the follow-up with James Saxon?
Which was also a highlight of the year. This is Mr. Whiskey Exchange.
Fucking Sukhinder Singh. Yeah.
That was remarkable. We were in the chairman's room, and the photo, if you look at the masthead, that photo was taken in the chairman's room. We were surrounded by his whiskey collection. He came in late. He rushed in the door from one meeting,
Yeah.
from solving one problem. He sat down with us for the duration of the interview, and then he jumped up and he rushed off to his next thing. But in that time where he was sitting in his chair across the chairman's table from us, surrounded by his collection, we were the only thing happening in his life at that moment. Yeah. And you and I had question and question and question. We got through our first question with him.
Yeah, this was the first time where I think we went into the interview not necessarily knowing which direction it would go into, because there's so many facets of,
and that's exactly
right,
it, right?
Yeah.
We could have talked about the director's picks. We could have talked about Single Malts of Scotland. We could have talked about the Whisky Exchange picks. We could have talked about the Whisky Show. We could have talked about, obviously, collecting minis and how that turned into a larger collection. We could have talked about running the biggest online retailer in the world. We could have talked about growing it in 20 years. We could have talked about hours worth of things. And when it ended up just being one question, I was happy for that one question to be thoroughly answered.
What I found interesting about that interview, because I agree with you, and it surprises me that I agree with you, because you and I are quite the same when and you'll understand what I'm about to say when I say it, is you and I are both control freaks. 100%
Yep.
control freaks. And we simply could not control the conversation. And we really didn't try. It was, hey, Sukhinder, here's a question, and boom, you're off to the races. And we, just like with Richard Seal, right? I think the conversation was somewhat similar, where you ask a question and you say, let go and let God. And wherever this leads to, it's going to lead to. And any follow-up questions that you or I had, you save them for another interview, or you toss them out because the conversation wasn't going that way. And you just have to be happy for the time you have.
But here's what's been really great about us getting that time with Sukhinder. Mm-hmm. Is we're obviously very good friends with Oliver Chilton. We've had him on the podcast a couple of times. Mm-hmm. We're always happy to spend time talking with Ollie. Sukhinder is now giving Ollie a hard time because whenever you and I have gone to London, we've gone out eating and drinking with Ollie, with Chris Mabin, Sukhinder, with Billy Abbott,
with Billy, yeah,
early in the episode.
Yep.
Sukhinder hasn't come along, and Sukhinder is now giving Ollie a hard time for not being invited along on those dining and drinking sessions. And so we will have a chance to just simply hang out with Sukhinder, and then we'll get him back onto the podcast, and we'll ask him some other questions. Yep. And it might be about the director's picks, and it might be about Smoss, and it might be about building what he and his brother have built over 20 years. It's absolutely remarkable. And maybe we'll get to ask him one more question on the podcast and see what episode that turns into. But it's exciting. I'm really excited to see more of him. He's a really special chap. And one of the things, and I'll say this before we then move on with the podcast, his humility is genuine. He doesn't want to bathe in what he has done, what he and his brother have achieved. He, and you and I said this way back in the beginning of this episode, his eyes are on the future. His eyes are on what's next.
All times. Yep.
And he doesn't want to listen to us waxing lyrical about his achievements. He wants to move on to the next achievement. And that's where Black Talk comes from. That's where Black Talk 50th anniversary comes from. That's where he's moving. And I love that. I absolutely love it. I think he's a really wonderful human being. And I personally want to hang out with him more and understand him more and learn from him more as well. So
Beautiful.
that was a real great moment in 2020.
There's no doubt about it. Yep, there's absolutely no doubt about it. And the way you talk about it makes me wonder why I didn't select the same damn thing.
Well, that's usual. My Kilchoman Madeira finish from Gene Charnas at Warehouse Liquors is finished, and I need another pour.
So I know you're about to get what will be your wild card pour. I don't have a bottle of my wild card pour because it hasn't hit the U.S. yet. And all I have are samples to have gone by. But I have my... So I want to talk about that in a second. But I do have my runner-up to my favorite wild card. And then there's a whiskey that I want to end on as well.
You have just made me realize I never mentioned my honorable mention for my 2020 whiskey.
Oh, shit, dude. Make that happen. Let's reveal. Let's get the gender reveal party. What color is the frosting inside the cupcake? Is it blue? Is it pink? Is it gray? Maybe it doesn't identify as it. What color are they?
I'm just hoping I don't start a forest fire with this gender reveal.
No, if you just sweep the forest. If you sweep the forest and get the leaves out, there'll be no fires. It's true.
So I'm not going to beat around the bush. I'm just going to jump straight into it because it's another bottling that I have poured for special friends. I've done a lot of outdoor, distanced pouring for special friends in 2020, and I know you have too. This is something that nobody has in their collection. Nobody. And we talked about Michael Nolan and his Glenbergie fetish. We talked about Moscow Jim and his Craigellachie fetish. This is our fetish, Joshua. This is FWP fetishism.
Ooh.
Just gone wild.
Whammo.
You and I own bottles, and we just mentioned Oliver Chilton a minute ago. We had a Zoom just drinking session, just a friendly drinking session with him, and we talked about this release. You talked about with Chris Udy on the Impex Deep Dive series, where Chris Udy cannot get his head around FWP fetishism, and this bottle. Incredibly well done. Beautiful package, beautiful label, beautiful whiskey inside. Yeah. This is cognac cask finished, 33-year-old Bowmore. It really takes my breath away. I was sipping on some of this just the other night, and I can be enveloped by this whiskey, which is so special. Isla Violets was the release that came out in 2020. And I wouldn't have it as my 2020 bottling because I know it doesn't fit all palates. And I know that the pricing on it doesn't fit all budgets. This is a £400 bottle.
Yeah.
Not $400.
Yeah,
it's a £400 bottle. And so I would be hard pressed to name this as my 2020 because it's just not accessible. Price and flavor. It's just not accessible. But for those who like this style and for those who have a little extra cash to throw at this bottle in 2020, real special, really special. And I've enjoyed it every time I've dipped into it, and I've thoroughly enjoyed sharing it, which is a marker for me on what we like to do with our whiskies.
I find it very interesting that you would take into consideration other people's palates for your own favorite non-SCN favorite whiskey of the year. Price point, I fully understand, right? It's like, say, oh, my favorite whiskey of the year was the 1957 Bowmore. That happened to be $100,000 per bottle. Like, no, you don't. No one says that. And if you say that, you're wrong for saying that, because that's just goddamn ridiculous. So price-wise, 400 pounds, that's a lot of money. But I don't understand why you would potentially say this could not be your whiskey of the year because it doesn't necessarily line up with other people's palates. I don't understand the logic there. Can you explain?
Yeah, for sure. When I pour something, if you've come to my house and we're sitting outside and we're socially distanced, and I put something into your glass, I want to be able to say about that whiskey, you will love it. It will transport you. It will take you on a journey. And again, as we mentioned earlier in the podcast, there are literally hundreds of things I can pull off my shelves to put into your glass. I understand that for some people who love whiskey just as much as we do, just as much as our listeners do, FWP doesn't have a place in the whiskey world. It's an off note. It's a failure. It's a misstep. It's like playing your favorite jazz album and you say, listen to the off notes, but listen to how far off base those notes go, right? It's hard to get people to go, yeah, I like that. I like that a lot, right? I'm okay understanding that FWP exists in a subcategory of a subcategory. I'm okay with that. And so if I tell you, here's the best thing I tasted in 2020, and it's an off note of an off note, a subcategory of a subcategory, I don't think I've really told you anything interesting about whiskey. I've only told you something esoteric about myself. That's not what my 2020 whiskey is here to do.
Yeah, see, I disagree with you here. I really do. Because first off, I feel... Firstly, before we even get to what I'm about to say, for those of you who are listening who don't understand what we're talking about when we say FWP Bowmore, in the decade of the 80s, the Bowmore Distillery produced a style of spirit that had a lot of floral notes. In some cases, in some more rare and unfortunate cases, very soapy Bowmore. But for the most part, it's a more floral style. And you're referring to them as off notes. And I wouldn't refer to them as off notes. I feel as if...
but the industry, those who don't like FWP refer to those notes as off notes.
Right, but again, I don't agree with them. They view them as off notes. I view them as a time and place, right? If we were to compare the whiskey to a band, right? Let's say Bowmore's the Bee Gees. The Bee Gees were
with you so far,
right? They were something very specific in the late 60s and early 70s, and then they kind of went away, and then they came back and they had their whole disco thing, which for maybe people who loved the old crooners Bee Gees maybe be put off a bit by the disco Bee Gees, but other people would say, no, the disco Bee Gees was where it was at. I didn't really like so much the old crooners of I made a joke that started the whole world crying. Right? I think it's different tastes. Similarly, again, comparing it to bands, I almost picture FWP Bowmore as the Kiss album Dynasty. That was their one disco album, which didn't match the other stuff that they were doing, but there were some damn good songs on that album. is not necessarily off. It's just different. And what do you like? And so I think if you try to set the stage saying some people don't like this Bowmore because the flavors are off, I don't think that's correct. I think that's the way that they would view it, but I think that they're wrong. I think the way it should be viewed is I don't like that decade because the style they're producing didn't fit my profile, what I enjoy. It doesn't mean it was off. It means it wasn't what they enjoyed, just like some people don't like Kiss Dynasty, just like some people don't like Bee Gees disco, just like some people don't like Yes 90215 when they got away from prog and went mainstream, right? It's a different style of whiskey. And I think it needs to be framed as such. And so other people might say, well, you keep on saying FWP. The reason why this floral style of Bowmore is called FWP is somewhere on some whiskey bulletin or whatever, chat room, someone referred to this style of Bowmore as French Horse Perfume, FWP, French Horse Perfume. And it's a style, Jason, that you and I love.
We do.
And it
within reason.
Within reason. Oh, there have been some awful ones.
The envelope.
Yeah,
yep,
there have been some awful ones. But it's a style that we are fascinated by, that we will buy each and every bottling if we see it available. There's no doubt about it, assuming we have the funds to. And so I see why it's your follow-up bottling. And I, too, just like you, I didn't mention my runner-up for favorite whiskey of the year. So I do have a runner-up.
It's just not enough time, Joshua, right?
I'm going to put it out there. I'm going to make it real simple, real quick. Fuck, where'd I put it? Oh, there it is. So in November, I decided to... Now this, I have to tell you that I'm breaking all of the rules. This bottling did not come out in 2020, but I've been sitting on this bottling for years for the right moment to open it. And when I opened it, I've got to be very honest with you in saying that I didn't really like it. But as it started to air, as the oxygen has gotten to it, it's gotten to be wonderful. And
I like this.
And I needed a very special whiskey for a very special occasion. And as you know, it is the 1980 Glenfarclas. It's what they call their Christmas malt, Christmas single Highland malt. It was bottled in 2002, so obviously it's not a 2020 whiskey. But it's something that I've held on to for a while and have wanted to open for the right occasion.
What's the strength on it?
54.7.
Okay, yeah, that'll hold.
Yep. It's from a single cask, a single sherry butt. This is bottle number 26 of 593 bottles. And first fill sherry, and it was just too earthy, too dirty for my likes. But once the air started hitting it, it gets really fruity, and there's some just old coffee grains and some oolong tea leaves, and it's so very expressive and fantastic a whiskey. It really is.
And you can definitely find that with some Glenfarclas. Is that Dunnage warehouse can be so fecund.
Yeah.
And it can just be so deep and dark. But then you take the sherry that they're using, and you can just have depths upon depths, dark fruit upon spiced fruit cake. Glenfarclas can go real deep.
Yep.
And unless you can get a bit of oxygen in there, unless you can somehow introduce a little bit of lightness, Glenfarclas can really, delve into the depths. And so what you're describing there doesn't necessarily surprise me. I'm just going to throw an additional in here, just as we're talking Glenfarclas. Again, we talked about this in a recent episode where Svi, our good friend Svi, had sent us some samples.
You're going where I want to go. Please continue.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay. he had sent us the Glenfarclas 2009, which was the unreleased distillery exclusive from this year, the Stillman's Dram. And it's got a whacking 60.1% ABV on it. But when I stuck my nose in that Glenfarclas, I was standing in the warehouse.
Yeah.
It transported me.
Yep.
And that's one of the many things I'm looking for whiskey to do is to transport me. And you and I have been fortunate. We've had some wonderful experiences. I know not everybody listening to the podcast has stood in any of the Glenfarclas warehouses. But when a whiskey expression can transport you to the warehouse, wonderful things are happening. Wonderful things are afoot. And I just wanted to give a little nod to that sample, which is long finished, is long gone. But boy, did I enjoy it as somebody who thoroughly enjoys standing in the Glenfarclas warehouses.
The fact that Zvi sent us each those care packages, along with our friend Danny Saltman, it was just so lovely, so generous. And later on, towards the end of this episode, I want to just make a quick reveal on something. That's all. That's all I want to say. Now, we've talked our favorite single cask nation bottling and the runner-up or honorable mention.
Honorable mention.
We've discussed our favorite whiskey of the year, and now plus the honorable mention. We've discussed our favorite episode of the year plus the honorable mention. We are now, if I'm understanding this correctly, we are now in the segment where we are discussing our wild card of the year. It could be a non-whiskey. It could be a whiskey that took us, that just came out of left field, right? There are definitely some unusual whiskeys out there being produced that are remarkable. So a wild card isn't necessarily non-whiskey. But here we are. We're at the wild card. And because I've been allowing you to go first, Jason, I am going to keep this streak, and I will allow you to go first yet again. What is your wild card of the year? And feel free to tease it out or let me guess. I'll let you do you, Jason.
Well, I think the number one tease here is that you have a bottle of this.
Wow, great. You like Grey Goose that much? I mean, it's a decent vodka, but...
Well, you have Grey Goose, I think, is the follow-up on that one. So there are multiple categories into which you and I are extending ourselves.
Yep.
And this is a category that I am now head over heels in love with. In falling in love with this category and in searching out the esoteric, there is a name that our listeners need to know. And the name is Eric Rodriguez.
Okay.
And Eric Rodriguez is considered the Indiana Jones of mezcal. And in terms of somebody putting in the time, putting in the miles, putting in the legwork, and pulling out really special examples of mezcal, there's a bottling of Salmiana that is remarkable. And it exists under the Palalma label. And I was introduced to this bottling by our friends Gabby and Chris Dion at the Mixing Glass in Orange County. And they were introduced to us by our good friend Elijah Amamamamamamamon. And they brought this bottling into their store. Now, what's really interesting is we deal with Skurnik. We have good friends at Skurnik in New York City, and Skurnik imported this bottling to the United States. And yet I still bought it, and I bought 2 bottles out of California, one for me and one for you. And it was with Skurnik in New York the entire time. And so this is 50% alcohol. This is, as I mentioned, Salmiana mezcal, Salmiana agave, and it's the maestro mezcalero is Patricio Hernandez Z, whatever the Z stands for there. Thank you, Kai, who has just brought me lunch because we've been recording, I think, at this point for 3 days. I don't think I've seen my family in 3 days.
Why is
But
it
they are-
your family is bringing you lunch? I've got nothing.
Nothing. Poor Joshua's got
So
nothing.
hungry.
Nothing at all.
So hungry.
But here's the thing. In tasting of our mezcals, thank you, Kai. In tasting of our mezcals, I've always tasted them in our single cask nation Spade Ram glass. And I sat in on a tasting hosted by Gabby at the mixing glass. And the talk is that the traditional clay vessel has a much wider mouth, a much wider opening, which allows you and I in tasting whiskey always talk about a bowl, right? How do you get a bowl? How do you hold the vapors? How do you dip your nose? And it's been interesting in exploring mezcal. It's much more open than that. And so I have started pouring my mezcals into an espresso cup. And the reason that I haven't been drinking this during my reveal is I knew as soon as I brought an espresso cup to my mouth, you would know exactly what I was doing.
Yeah.
But in tasting this agave, in tasting this mezcal, discovered, found, unearthed, curated by Eric Rodriguez, drinking it from the espresso cup, it just unleashes this massive hit of menthol. And you and I, going back and forth on whiskeys, I've always been envious of those who discover menthol or eucalyptus
'cause you don't normally
from
get it.
whiskeys.
Yeah.
And I don't normally get it. In this mezcal, I just get the massive hit of menthol. And as you sit with it, it almost becomes spearmint as well. I reach for this continually.
Interesting.
I absolutely, passionately, head over heels. And it was $130. It didn't come cheap. It more than delivers on that price tag. And if we're paying, mezcaleros in Mexico living wages for their product, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
I'm absolutely okay with that.
Yep.
So long as Eric Rodriguez is passing it down the chain, I am okay paying $130 for this. It's remarkable.
Do you get the jalapeno on the nose? Mm-hmm. Yeah, the jalapeno is huge. And it's one of those notes, right, where you say, I remember early on nosing and tasting whiskey from Amrut, and I would get candied fennel seed. And then you taste, nose and taste whiskey from Japan, and then you get very Japanese kind of notes. And then you nose and taste mezcal from Mexico, and you get very Mexican kind of notes. And you think,
Right.
is it just your brain being like oddly racist in a weird way? And no, the fact of the matter is, once you mentioned it, I remembered the bottle that you got me. I'm holding on to it. And I said, I'm just gonna nose this bottle, and immediately jalapeno.
Well, it was, you just recently asked me this, and I don't know if it was in a Zoom. I don't know if it was in a One Nation Under Whiskey. I don't even know if it was in an extra. I don't even know if it was recorded. But I do remember you saying to me, what started to turn the tide for you with mezcal when
Yes.
I talked about it being... actually, I think it might have been on the distillery deep dive that we did with Impex.
It was, yes,
when
yes,
you
yes,
interviewed me. And the thing for me was that, and you quoted me perfectly in that interview, mezcal for me so often smelled like hangover and poor decision. And the day that I found fresh jalapeno skin in a mezcal, it was a game changer. And so that freshness, that brightness, that crispness, that greenery, right? Really wonderful. So wonderful. And I'm going to, and I'm sorry to do this to you, Joshua, I'm going to throw my honourable mention in right here, right now.
Do it.
Because it makes perfect sense. When I was in that, it was a Re Campero tasting hosted by Gabby and the Mixing Glass. I tasted their Mexicano, which I know you love.
Yes. Oh, yeah. It is one of my top 3 of agaves.
Right?
Yep.
Right? It had a spiciness to it that made me so happy. It went so far beyond just the jalapeno skin and really went for the spiciness of jalapeno that Re Campero Mexicano became my honorable mention of 2020.
Beautiful.
Wild card category.
Absolutely beautiful. So first off, I love those entries, and I need to go back to your wild card agave, to your mezcal, because obviously you can see I've got my bottle up here. I've drunken maybe an inch past the shoulders, right? And I need to drink more because my recollection of this agave was almost as if it was slightly unbalanced. There was this bright freshness on the nose and then a bit too much earth going on the palate. But at the same time, right, anytime you're tasting something, how you're approaching it will affect what you're tasting, right? And so I think I may have just approached it in a different way. And like you had mentioned, and you're pointing to right now, you're drinking it out of an espresso cup. I always drink my spirits out of a Glencairn or something that's Glencairn in shape. And I think that this spirit simply requires a different vessel to be enjoyed out of. So,
Yeah. And to be clear, I think if you popped it in a Glencairn, if you popped it in a Spade Ram, if you popped it into something else, you'd enjoy it just fine.
Yeah.
To me, popping it into something that opens up the mouth of the drinking vessel, and then it's even the entry point as it goes into your mouth. You've got a wider entry point in your mouth, and I think it expands some of the flavors in there. And if you're talking about this kind of level of imbalance, add more flavors to it. See if you find the balance in it. I think there's a whole world to be explored in that Palalma Salmiana agave selection.
Could we talk about a wider entry point in your mouth just a bit longer?
Moving on.
Okay. So my wild card, and I mentioned this before, I don't have a bottle of it. I have a bottle of the honorable mention, but I don't have a bottle of the actual wild card. All I had were a couple of samples, and I quickly drank through them. And I'll be very honest here. When you and I first started discussing our 2020 year in review episode, and generally what we do in our year in review episode, I had forgotten just that, generally what we do. And so I had it in my head that I needed to pick my top 3 whiskeys of the year. And what was so surprising to me is for the first time ever, a rum made it into my top 3 whiskeys of the year. This was a spirit that was so remarkable, it outshone all the other whiskeys I had, barring the one Kilhoman that I mentioned before, the 8-year-old Madeira finished.
And just for the record, I knew you were going to pick this as your wild card of the year.
Yes. And full disclosure, I work for Impex Beverages, who are the importer of this particular brand, of this particular product. And working for them or not, I fell in love with this, and therefore it became my number one wild card. And if we had done this event in the way that I thought it was, where it was top 3 whiskeys, this non-whiskey would make my number 2 whiskey. That's how incredible this spirit was. And so the big reveal for me is the Black Tot 50th anniversary rum. This is a rum for rum drinkers, for whiskey drinkers, simply for people who enjoy fine spirits, it is a remarkable spirit that is so incredibly expressive on the nose, on the palate, and on the finish, but more so balanced from nose to palate to finish. And I think, too, really highlights what can be so special about rum. You know, when we think about our business, Jason, and our business is primarily single casks, we can say this distillery produced this single cask that was remarkable. Where quite often when it comes to rum, to make a remarkable rum, you're relying on rums from a multitude of distilleries, a multitude of countries, different distillation styles, different base styles, whether it's molasses or cane sugar, or, or what have you. Or it's a much more involved, or can be a much more involved process. And what Elixir distillers have done with Blacktop 50th anniversary is fucking monumental. This is a remarkable spirit that, I asked you before, how would you feel if all of a sudden you didn't have access to unpeated whiskeys anymore? And you would say, well, geez, I just mentioned this whiskey and that whiskey, and those were my favorites, and no, I would miss it. And I would go so far as to say, I'm trying to make a statement here without, I don't want to lie here, and I don't want to be controversial.
Oh, boy.
But what I would say is that if this weren't in the world, if access to this weren't a thing, then we'd be a lesser world. I think that we didn't even know a hole had existed until this rum came about. It's fucking remarkable and so pleasing, and I think eye-opening to those who think rum is the stuff you mix with Coke, or that rum is that overly sugared product that's it's just so sweet, it's not for me, or they love it because it's so sweet. No. This is real rum that will give you the sweetness that you're looking for. They'll give you the spiciness, the earthiness. It just ticks every friggin' box I have. Every box.
I agree with you wholeheartedly, and I would make the same statement about my mezcal selection. My whiskey life is richer for having this mezcal in it.
Oh, I love it.
Right?
I love it. Yep. Perfect. Perfect.
And I've been leading tasting after tasting after tasting, where I've opened my tasting with the black tot, the standard black tot, 46.2%
Yep, finest
alcohol.
Caribbean. Yep, standard one. Yep.
And saying to people, this is a rum for whiskey drinkers. And then I've been saying to people, don't finish your pour of it before we go off into exploring the other whiskies. And we move off into an Oishi or a Focano, and then we move into a Milk and Honey or a Penderyn, and then we move into a single cask nation, single cask, and then we close on a Kilchoman, oftentimes Snag, sometimes a Macker Bay. But I keep saying to people, keep that rum in your glass and keep returning to it as we go through this tasting. And as I said earlier in the podcast, point, counterpoint.
Yeah. Yep.
Keep bouncing back and forth. When you say, could you live without unpeated whiskey? No, I couldn't. Do I love peated? Yes, I do. But this minty mezcal opens my eyes to what's happening in my single malts, in my peated single malt scotchies. It adds to the category that we love first and foremost. But boy, is rum doing some wonderful things. Is mezcal doing some wonderful things. Armagnacs and cognacs and sherries. big alcohol world out there, and you and I are dipping our toe in multiple places, and we know our listeners are dipping their toes in multiple places, and I think we're all enriched by dipping our toes in multiple places.
Yep. So, my runner-up.
No, honorable mention.
Oh yeah, the honorable mention is also a mezcal, and I'll be very honest with you in that it was until last night neck and neck with another thing, and I had a Lustau Oloroso that was going to be my honorable mention wild card.
I love the fact your honorable mentions have honorable mentions.
Right, this is the world we live in, Jason. But I'm about.
We love so many things, Joshua.
So many things, all
so
the
many
things.
things.
But I'm about to pour my honorable mention, and I'm a little nervous here, Jason.
Well, you should be more nervous if Jason doesn't have a bottle of your other honorable mention.
You have a sample of it. There's no doubt about it. And in fact, I've seen you pour. You have a 200 milliliter sample of it.
Okay.
So similar to your mezcal being the wild card, I have a mezcal as a runner-up, and I'm a bit nervous in that I think that I got it in 2020. I think it was bottled in late 2019, but finally available in 2020. I think I got this in January. And that is La Medita. So it is a mezcal from La Medita, which is a brand owned by, I think they're owned by Skurnik. At the very least, they're imported by Skurnik. And this is the Arroqueño, one of my 3 favorite agaves, and you should have
Arroqueño,
it. Jason, do you see all this land that the sun shines upon?
This is all your agave.
Yeah. So I'll be very honest in saying the La Medita Arroqueño, and I looked at the label, right? The harvest was 2018, the bottling was in 2019, but I do feel as if this was released in 2020, in January of 2020. But this particular bottling of Arroqueño was my first experience with Arroqueño, and I have since picked up a few bottles from other producers of the Arroqueño mezcal or mezcal from the Arroqueño agave.
What's your strength on that bottling from which you're pouring?
I love how exact this is.
Okay.
47.54% alcohol.
Damn it. So I've got the 200 ml bottle that I picked up, and its harvest is 2019, distillation is 2019, year of bottling is 2019, and my strength is 46.29.
Okay, so mine is the 2018 harvest with the 2019 bottling. So there you go. So one of the things...
Yeah, you raved to me about this. You're the reason that I picked up, and I actually got a range of 200 ml bottles from Roma in New York City. Our good friend Anthony Levinson is in charge of spirit buying there, and I picked these up from him because you wax lyrical about La Medita as a brand, as a trustworthy, wonderful selections, wonderful distillate. And the Arroqueño, I get hobnobs. As soon as I stick my nose in here, I get hobnobs.
So before we go on with tasting notes, because I think this really is a respect thing, and I'm not sure if a lot of our listeners know this, but if you look at mezcal bottles, they should most of them will, all of them should honor the mezcalero, the maestro mezcalero, whoever she or he happens to be, because this is the person who's in charge of producing the spirit that you're putting into your glass. And so for this La Medita, it is Antonio Cortés Aragon, and the Araqueño that he's done here is remarkable. Let me give you.
If I can interject.
Yeah, please do.
We're talking Araqueño. Some of our listeners may know it as Americana.
That's a really good point. Yeah, because I've had some Americanas and forgot that they're the same. Just which one has the Mexican name and which one has the even more Mexican name. But let me tell you why this is the honorable mention. I compare this particular bottling, and typically Araqueño or Americana in general, that agave, to the weeded bourbons of the world. There's this bright, high sweetness that comes through with this agave that you don't normally find in others, right? Take the mezcal that you had just mentioned before, and what did I say? Did you get the jalapeno? That is an earthy note. And then when I taste it, it's all earthy and it's heavy. And, it's that style. What was the style of agave again from yours?
Mine was Salmiana.
Salmiana, right? That has a different flavor profile than Araqueño does. Just like if you think of bourbon producers, they're switching up their mash bill. This producer's got a bit more corn. This producer's got a bit more malt. This producer's got a bit more wheat. And it affects your overall flavor profile. And those that enjoy wheated bourbons like it for a particular reason. It's lighter, it's sweeter, sometimes softer, but it's unmistakable. And that's what I think about the Araqueño. It's lighter, it's brighter, it's sweeter, and it's unmistakable.
And I agree with everything you say.
But
I also...
not a but an also.
No.
Okay.
No. I've learned from our friends in the improvisation community. I only say "and" these days. And on the nose, I get a certain cheesy funkiness in the background. And on the palate, I get a certain tobacco quality
100%
happening.
Yep, 100%.
And so I'm with you on everything about it being bright. And it was funny because as I was making my comparison with the Salmiana, I'm thinking, oh, this is just as bright as my own selection. And there's a cheesy funkiness. And there's a tobacco quality. It's fascinating. And I will say this. In 2020, I read Emma Jansen on mezcal, and then the recommendation that I always make is Tom Bullock's book on mezcal as well. Emma Jansen's book is simply called Mezcal, and Tom Bullock's book is The Mezcal Experience.
Yes.
But I recommend both of those, but reading Emma Jansen in 2020 was a real treat. And I think she did a great job with her book.
Yeah, part of me wonders, those notes that you're talking about, part of me wonders if that's coming from the fermentation, because if you look at the back of the label, and this is one of the things that I love about mezcal labels, they'll quite often talk about the agave, the age of the agave, how the agave was crushed or chopped or what have you, the fermentation, how it was distilled, and so on. They give a whiskey lover all of the geeky information that a whiskey lover would want, just in the form of a mezcal label and how the mezcal was produced. But if you look at the fermentation, at least with mine, the fermentation was in wooden casks, right?
Yep, same here.
Right, and so we understand how important fermentation is in Scotch whiskey, and it can play such a part in the overall flavor profile. Imagine what that does in a mezcal where you're not aging it.
Exactly.
Right? And so fermentation likely plays a much more important role in the overall flavor profile of the mezcal. So
Well, and yeast is simply atmospheric yeast.
Yes, yep.
It's not
Yep.
additional yeast like we have in Scotland. And, for us in the 70s into the 80s in Scotland, making a move from brewer's yeast to distiller's yeast, here you've simply got open vessel fermentation.
yeah.
And the flavors that will bring in. You actually had me reaching for my Paloma here to look up the same information. And here it says fermentation, 30% pulque and wild yeast. And so there's that pulque. It's almost like your sour mash in bourbon.
Oh,
Right?
interesting.
You bring in a little drop or more of what previously fermented, like your sourdough starter in your bread, as we've all explored in 2020. And here, you have your pulque delivering some of that established fermentation, but then you have the wild yeast that you pull from the air. Fascinating category. Absolutely. I am so head over heels in love with mezcal. It's ridiculous.
Right. What's not to love? Yep. 100%.
But as you rightly point out, rum has really captured my and our attention in the last year, and we'll do more of it going forward. Spending time with cognac and Armagnac producers and sherry producers, and we're going to do much more of that going forward. It's wonderful, wonderful having a listenership and having those who purchase our bottles and follow our palates and dig our palates, bringing new things to them. And being able to say, Scotch whiskey is a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful category. And, because I've learned that in 2020, and there's so much more. And we're exploring the so much more. And our listeners and our consumers and our nation members and our fans and our followers are buying. They're buying what we're putting out. It's remarkable. I'm so incredibly lucky. You and I are so incredibly lucky that we have people following and really paying attention to our curated selections. It's magnificent.
So I'm going to ask you, because we've come here with a few goals in mind, and we've accomplished said goals. I am going to ask you to pour a final pour of 2020, a final pour together of 2020, and then I've got a closing question for you. I've already selected my pour, and so I'll ask you to select your pour. This got real uncomfortable real fast.
I love that you just spring this on me. Here, Jason, do this thing right now. All right. I'm going to need another glass because I've only got a peated glass there. I'm going to pull a fresh glass, also from Travis Williams. What it is, what we do, that we do. And then I'm going to try and keep this out of camera.
Are you ready for my question?
No, I'm not.
Let me start with this. As everybody knows, whether you're listening to this podcast or not, whether you're just going about your day, you don't even have to even know what whiskey is. But you know one thing. This is something every person has in common, whether you're living in the U.S., whether you're living in the Netherlands or South Africa or Israel or Scotland or Uruguay, you name it. We all agree 2020 was a fucking shit show.
100%.
It's a
no argument here.
Terrible year.
Yep.
Being the eternal optimist that I am,
I'm glad you're finally wearing that title. Yes.
I have to think that there is some silver lining that has come from 2020 that should be noticeable or notable. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious if you have a 2020 silver lining observation that you'd like to share with our listeners.
You have asked me this question at the right time.
Okay.
I'm glad you did not ask me this question before December 20, because I would have struggled with an answer. I hosted a Zoom tasting on December 20 for 24, it was 25 guys, of whom I did not know 24 of them. It was put together by Andrew Miller, the champagne of
Oh, yes,
people.
of course, the champagne of people. Yes.
And as we ended the tasting, one of the people in attendance said the thing that I'm about to say to you. He said, 2020 has been a year, and I didn't realize how much I needed this tasting until now. The tasting. And I think you and I built Single Cask Nation on the back of community and the idea of community and how it brings a community, a nation of whiskey drinkers together. And over the course of 2020, with social distancing and backdoor drinking and, no hugs, which I know you cherish dearly, as do I, but not to the same extent. There's a lot missing in 2020. And online, whether they be Zoom, whether they be Microsoft Teams, whether they be FaceTime, whether they be Google Hangouts, community has existed online. And in listening to podcasts, I have felt part of different communities. And I really think that coming out of 2020, community has been a word of the year. And I'm okay taking that as a silver lining for the shit show that has been 2020. We have sought out our communities in 2020.
Yeah.
And we have healed ourselves as part of these communities in 2020. And I think that's a good thing. A very, very good thing.
Yep. Cannot disagree, cannot refute any of that. And I had to be very honest with you, I had two just like with our whiskeys, I had something that came to the fore and something that was an honorable mention or a runner-up. And so for me, what 2020 has done, it's highlighted how important connection is, because I'm missing it so much. You were very right in saying I'm missing hugs. I am a hugger. I'm a tactile person. I need to be touching people who want to be touched and be near people and share a hug and share a drink and be arm in arm with people. And that's always been a thing, but I feel as if I've almost taken that for granted, how special that simple, that very simple physical connection is to people. And it's just highlighted the fact that I shouldn't take that for granted, that it is a very special thing that I'll be looking forward to, should it happen again in 2021 or 2022 or what have you.
And that's what I was going to throw in here. I think in 2021, or if it ends up being 2022, I think even Anthony Wills will be receptive of a Joshua Hatton hug.
Well, he's always accepted my hugs reluctantly. I think at this point,
Correct.
yes.
I think he will seek it out.
Yes, he will.
In 2021/2022.
And if he doesn't, he's wrong. And I'll tell that to his face. But here's the other thing, and this is a very, very, very personal thing for me. So when you and I started this company, when we came together in 2010 and had the idea for the company, and then in 2011 established the company, and then in 2012 started bottling and releasing whiskey, right? An unfortunate thing for me that fell by the wayside was playing music. And I simply didn't have any connection to it anymore. And what COVID has allowed me, it's been free nights to connect with my old bandmates and start playing music again. And, you know, I love you, and I love our business, and I love my wife, and I love my kids, and I love my life in general. But it wasn't until I started playing with them again that I realized that there was a massive hole, and a creative outlet that I had been missing. And now I'm starting to play with them again. And I can't even begin to tell you the elation where your brain just shuts off and muscle memory kicks in to play a song that you've written, arranged, and laughed along with. And it's just amazing. And for as awful as COVID has been, and it's been awful, and it will continue to be awful, and will unfortunately likely continue to take friends from us, that is such a highlight for me. It is such a silver lining for me.
And I think in reciprocating that love of which you speak a moment ago, who has been one of your number one cheerleaders in you getting back into your music?
I'm pointing at him right now.
Yes, you are. I have made, it's a joke with a small j. I've made a joke for far too many years that your hobby is work. And that has worried me for a decade. And to see you return to music as your hobby has elated me. And I have absolutely cheered you on every step of the way.
That you have.
Walk away from the inbox. Walk away from the laptop. Walk away from your office. Go and make music with people you enjoy and you cherish and you love. Go do that. And I couldn't be happier that you've done that in 2020. And so I cheers you on that. And I say continue to make your music and continue to be in that realm and fucking buy your new guitars and do your thing. You know, your thing has been music. My thing has been reading. And I have returned to reading, you know, whole cloth in 2020. I'm going to miss a book a week by a hair, but damn if I haven't tried to get through a book a week. And that's what I do when I step away from email, when I step away from the laptop and the screen and step outside the office. I throw myself into reading, and that has been a wonderful escape in 2020.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad you've had yours. I'm glad I've had mine. I will also say, as you talk about community and connection, and I talk about community and connection, knowing that we have our listeners, knowing that we have our nation members, knowing that we have bottles spread across the globe, knowing that we want to get to Australia and New Zealand and points farther afield. And it's not just you and me and Jess. When we started this company, when we started these podcasts, and I knew it was a good idea, and I knew it was something to commit to, but I was so wooden, and I was so cognizant of the microphone, and so cognizant of the recording. All of those things are gone. When I sit here talking to you, I think about our listeners sitting right beside us. I think about our friends in New Zealand and our friends in Australia and our friends in the United Kingdom and our friends in Sweden and our friends in America and Canada and our friends in Japan and our friends in the Philippines. We have global friends to whom we speak weekly.
Yeah. Yep.
And as much as we only hear them over email and Facebook Messenger and Instagram message or whatever the fuck they call it these days, or they send things into the PO box, whatever it happens to be, I feel 100% connected, and I absolutely love it, and it makes me feel incredibly lucky in this existence of ours, and I thank them for their friendship and for their support and for using their currency to buy our bottles. It's remarkable, absolutely remarkable. And I cheers them with this dram, which is our Glenfarclas 9-year-old SCN online bottle.
I'm so glad that you went with Glenfarclas, because what I went with was the Glenfarclas that Zvi Wiesel had sent. He sent you a sample. He sent me a sample. We mentioned it earlier on in the podcast. And this one's so interesting that you talk about this particular Glenfarclas as being focused on the dunnage warehouse. And this is one of the things that I appreciate about you and me, is that sometimes our palates will veer from one another. This, for me, sure, the dunnage warehouse is there. There's no doubt about it. You can't escape it. But I'm focused more on the fruit. And what surprises me about this, and once I say it, you'll say, "Oh wow, that is surprising," is that this Glenfarclas is, to my palate, so plum forward that I shouldn't love it, because I don't like a plumminess in my whiskey at all. But it's so well done. It's so fruity, yet earthy, yet a little bit of spice going on.
What have we learned this podcast, Joshua? Just because it's Madeira doesn't mean you should dismiss it. Just because it's port finished doesn't mean you should dismiss it. Just because it has a plumminess doesn't mean you should dismiss it. Always accept the whiskies and the beyonds on their own merits.
Indeed.
And accept them or reject them on their own merits, not as they exist within a wider context. The same is true of people.
So I say this to you in closing, Jason. This is year 4. I mean, granted, the season isn't over yet, but we're nearing it.
It's not over.
It's not over yet.
It's not over.
But this is year 4, you and me. And if 2020 has taught me anything, it's taught me to not take anything for granted. And so I want you to know I don't take any part of our friendship, of our business relationship for granted at all. I don't take our listenership for granted at all, or our customers. And dare I say, friends. We're not that big a company where we still don't know a lot of the people that buy from us, thankfully. I think we're getting close, but we still know a lot of the names, and I don't take any of them for granted. And my goal for 2021, because I don't assume it to be a better year than 2020. I simply don't. But my goal for 2021 is to remain as humble and as thankful as possible for anybody and everybody who's helped you and I to get through the rough times, as we've hopefully helped them to get through their own rough times. I just remain thankful and feeling hashtag blessed, as it were, Jason. For you, for our listeners, for our customers, for our wives, for our kids. I mean, it's a tough life out there, and we have it far better than so many others, but we shouldn't take the little things for granted that make our lives special, that make our lives potentially easier than other people's lives. Those things need to be recognized and acknowledged and thanked.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I cheers to that. Cheers.
Cheers, cheers, cheers. Shit.
Yeah, the
What did you click?
the thing for...
Shit, that didn't work. Fuck, that didn't work. Oh, there you go. You just have to not hold the glass.
There you go. You found it. Now, don't smash the glass. Yeah, the thing that my wife and I have tried to convey to our kids in 2020, and we've been doing it for a decade now, but with even more focus in 2020, is when we look around, how do we lift up others where we are able? Mm-hmm. How do we do that? And even though we're a whiskey company and a spirits company, and in the grand scheme of things, what a silly, silly thing to be. You and I look around and we say, how do we lift up others where we are able? Mm-hmm. And that's what we put our minds to. And that's what we do. And as we are lifting up others are lifting up us. And we thank them for that, for noticing us and for assisting us.
And I lift my glass to that sentiment. Jason, it has been an interesting, an unusual, a difficult, sometimes satisfying, sometimes pleasing, sometimes fucking heartbreaking year. But it's been yet another year with you, and I'm thankful for you. I'm thankful for our listeners. And I'm excited for what 2021 has to bring us. And hopefully,
always.
My hope was, because we've been hinting at people for so long about these other projects we're working on, my hope was that we would have been able to have a bit of a gender reveal for our projects in what we had hoped would be 2021, but we're not there yet. My hope is that in 2021 we will be, especially seeing as bottles are being ordered and labels are being approved and blah, 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 that we will be able to share that in 2021. Until then, all I can do is share my thanks to you and share my thanks to our listeners and customers and so on.
Love to you, love to your family, love to our listeners, love to our supporters. Here's to 2021, brother. Cheers.
Cheers. Chin chin, two chins, two clits.
Click clit.